So this is your time today, okay? So you feel free to interrupt me at any point to ask questions. Do not hesitate to do that because, again, this is your time. We want to make sure we get questions addressed, and we want to make sure that we have the discussion that we need to have as well. We're going to cover a lot of ground today, quite a bit of ground. This morning, we're going to go back into the 3 rules. We're going to talk a lot more about adaptive grazing and what I call the nuts and bolts of adaptive grazing. And then in the afternoon, we're going to dive a little deep into genetics and epigenetics and marketing, and then just sort of try to tie it all together, okay? So it'll be a variety of subjects. I'll be sharing with you a number of things that are happening that you may not be aware of, but that are hugely pertinent to all of our futures in terms of what's happening in the ag industry, in the livestock sector, and so forth, and what's happening in terms of consumer awareness, consumer perception, consumer demand. So we work in all of those areas pretty extensively, and so we have a pretty good handle on what is occurring in that regard. So again, interrupt me at any point. You can throw something at me. You can say, hey, you, whatever you want to, and I'll respond, all right? So how many, give me a show of hands, how many were in yesterday afternoon's session? Okay, a number of you. There'll be some repetitiveness initially, okay? But that's never bad because we all learn something a little differently, and we actually hear something a little differently, don't we, when we hear something repeated. And I do that all the time. I'm like, wow, I didn't catch that last time. And we'll also add another layer of depth this morning to what I presented relative to adaptive stewardship yesterday afternoon. One thing that I can tell you, I'll share with you very quickly my background, my history, because that's context. For those of you in the session yesterday, you remember me talking about context, and I'm going to talk a lot more about context today because that's so critically important that you understand your context. And to help you understand where I'm coming from, I'm going to share with you a little bit about my context. So I was born and raised right here in South Carolina on a farm that was not too far from Rock Hill. So for any of you that know South Carolina or from here, you know where Rock Hill is. So that's where I originally called home. The farm has been in my family since 1840, and they still have and operate the family farm. I represented the 6th generation. The 8th generation is active on the farm today. So I value that heritage, and therefore I value everybody's family farm and ranch heritage. I think it's critically important. I think it's a very vital part of the fabric of this country, and that it's something that we need to preserve at all cost. So that's one of the things that I strongly believe. Now, I was the oldest son. In my entire time growing up, I wanted and was fully convinced that I was going to go away to college, and in my family, that was Clemson, okay? There you go. You didn't even consider going anywhere else in my family. And if you did, you would have been what was called a black sheep, right? So, and you certainly didn't consider the Gamecocks, all right? That would have been just really bad in my family. So I was going to go to Clemson, and get a degree in animal science, come back home to the family farm and stay there the rest of my life. And I mean, I was dead set on that. So I went to Clemson after graduating from high school, graduated in high school in 1978, went to Clemson, got my degree in animal science, just like I said I would, came back home, just like I said I would. But I had this very persistent major professor that he kept calling me up, I mean, every 2 weeks or so. For the next year and a half, he would call me and ask me to come back to graduate school. I was like, no, I'm not interested in that. I don't want to do that. And he kept calling me and kept calling me. And then a year and a half later, after calling me persistently like that, he finally said, okay, Alan, he said, I've got one last offer for you. And if you don't want to do this, then I promise I'll leave you alone. I won't call you again. I said, okay, what is it? And he said, well, there's a place in the Virgin Islands called St. Croix. And there's a breed of cattle down there called the Centipole that were developed in the Virgin Islands. And he said, if you'll go down there, and there's a college down there, College of the Virgin Islands, that is actually a land grant. He said, if you'll go down there and you'll work with the Centipole breeders and collect data on the cattle, and we want you to do the genetic history of the Centipole breed from their inception in the late 1800s to what at that time was the current 1982. And my whole life growing up to that point, in terms of travel away from home, I'd never been any further than here, Myrtle Beach, okay, or the Blue Ridge Mountains. That was the sum total of my experience in life in terms of what existed outside of our farm. And so for that 21 or 22 years of my life, I'd never been beyond those boundaries. And I think it was because I didn't know I was free to leave. But anyway, so the Caribbean sounded pretty darn exotic, right? I mean, I can't remember whether I was 21 or 22, but it sounded pretty exotic. I'd always seen it on TV and in magazines or whatever, and wow, I may need to try that. So I took him up on it. I went down to St. Croix and lived for a year there on the island. And I found out, now the island is 8 miles wide, 26 miles long. And after a year of living there, and all you're doing is driving in circles, the 26-mile circle, one of the first things I wanted to do when I got back was just get in a vehicle and drive for a ways. But I greatly enjoyed my time on St. Croix. Got tremendous culture shock. So for this rural South Carolina boy, it was a game changer in terms of introducing me to a totally different way of thinking, a new world, all of these types of things. And then I got taught, after getting my master's, so I went back up to Clemson and did my coursework and thesis and all that. And I got talked into going on for a PhD. So I went to LSU, and I was wrapping up a 25-year-long project. And for any of you who have experience in academia, that don't happen anymore, okay? There is no such thing as a 25-year project anymore, but it was a 25-year rotational crossbreeding project. And I wrapped up the final 3 years of that and did my dissertation on the whole 25 years worth of data. But for whatever reason, I felt compelled after that to go into academia instead of going back to the family farm. So again, totally inadvertently, totally unplanned. So when you think you have your life planned out, God laughs at that and throws you all kinds of curveballs, right? So I ended up doing 15 years in academia with my final stint at Mississippi State University, and that's why I live in the state of Mississippi yet today. So I was at Louisiana Tech University and then at Mississippi State University. But after 15 years, I was a tenured full professor. So in the academic world, that means you have it made, right? They can't get rid of you unless you do something exceedingly stupid. And you've got all the benefits, retirement and health and all that other stuff, and guaranteed paycheck every month, the whole bit. But I started seeing a lot of inconsistencies. And I started noting that the things that I was learning outside of the university, by the way, okay, but the things that I was learning in real life, in real ranching, in real farming, and in going and visiting other places, greatly conflicted with a lot of the things in the research that we were doing with the university. And it started bothering me. And so for several years, I had this conflict. And I started trying to see how we could do some of this research that I believed really needed to be done to what we now call regenerative at the university. And I found out there really wasn't a vehicle to get that done, and nobody at the university wanted to do any of that, okay? It was very much against what everybody else thought, including our administration, thought we needed to do. And there was certainly no research funding for that, especially at that time. And at the university, the dirty little secret is that if you're going to be successful as a professor, a researcher, and all of that, you got to write a lot of grant proposals and you got to bring in a lot of outside money to the university. That's how you really get tenure and promotion, okay? That's how it really happens. And I was successful at that. I'd brought in a lot of grant money and so forth, but it wasn't in anything that was really meaningful. So I have all these I have more than 100 in my academic career, more than 100 peer-reviewed publications. And today, you know how many of those I would tell any of you to go back and read? None. Don't waste your time, okay? They are not worth your time to read. As a matter of fact, I never go back and look them up and read them, okay? I don't even know where they all are and don't care. Now, that's a sad statement, isn't it? But at the same time, I learned a lot. I call that 15 years in academia my Moses in the wilderness years. Okay, you know, Moses had to have his 40 years in the wilderness before he was prepared, right, to lead the nation of Israel out of Egypt. I feel like I had to have my 15 years in academia. And so I had a difficult decision to make. Tenured, full professor, fully vested, all the benefits, guaranteed paycheck, brand new baby just born, our last born child, our youngest son. I go home, tell my wife I'm thinking of leaving. She looks at me and says, "Have you lost your ever-living mind? What are we going to do?" All my colleagues at the university said, "You are an idiot. Why would you leave this?" But I did. Biggest leap of faith I ever made, but I did. Have never regretted it since. We've had the privilege of being able to work with thousands of farmers and ranchers in every conceivable environment that you can imagine, 34 different countries, and in every type of agricultural production and enterprise that you can imagine. I have learned far more since the year 2000 than I ever learned in all of my years of graduate school and academia. And it's been far more meaningful. That's brought us to the point of the things that I'm going to share with you today. Because these are the things that make a real difference. These are the things that change your life on your farm, on your ranch, that change your financial aspects, your debt load, and it changes your quality of life. And as I told the group yesterday, I'm 61 right now. I have zero plans to retire because I'm having way too much fun. I do not want to retire because I don't want to miss out on what else is happening and what else is going to happen. And the beautiful thing about regenerative agriculture, it is not a destination. There's no end point. This is a journey. And we are learning every day on this journey. New discoveries. Why would you want to miss that? So it's amazing. If we're going to talk a lot today about context, and we're going to talk a lot today about observation, the powers of observation. And if you really nail those two in what you do on your farms and your ranches, it is an absolute game changer. And one of the things that has been lost, unfortunately, by many farmers and ranchers today, and yes, absolutely by researchers. So as a researcher, I'm going to call us out as researchers, and I'm going to admit, most researchers, as well as farmers and ranchers, have lost their real powers of observation. We may think we're observing, but there's a ton that we're missing, and we're going to talk a lot about that today. And as a researcher, really what we did, all we focused on out there in the field was just the specific data points we had to collect. And we really didn't pay attention to everything else that was going on around us. And yet, everything else that was going on around us informed the data that we were collecting. But when you fail to take those other observations and to account for those in the data analysis and then the conclusions that you're drawing from your data, you're going to be wrong. You're going to be wrong. You're going to think and you're going to be convinced as a researcher you are absolutely correct in terms of those research results that you're presenting to farmers and ranchers. But in reality, you're going to be wrong because you are missing the greater context. And you did not see some of the critical things that you should have seen that would have led you to a very different conclusion on the exact same set of data. So that's what I want you to understand. So, as we go into adaptive stewardship, I want to first, and I defined this yesterday, so a lot of this I'll go, since so many of you were in there yesterday, I'll go through a lot of this quick, and then we'll expand on some of the other things I really want to hit. But I first want to define regenerative agriculture. So again, it is farming and ranching in synchrony with nature in the four ecosystem processes to repair, rebuild, revitalize, and restore ecosystem function, starting with life beneath the soil and expanding to life above. That is so important that our first focus must be on life beneath the soil. But let's face it, as farmers and ranchers, we have tended to focus where first? Up here, on what we see, right? Not on what's beneath our feet and what we don't see routinely every day. So we've got to alter the way that we see things, and we use the 6 principles and the 3 rules. I went through the 6 principles in detail yesterday, so I won't do that again today. But I love this quote. I put it up yesterday as well, but W.C. Loudermilk in his book, Conquest of the Land Through 7,000 Years, he wrote, "The land does not lie. It bears a record of what men write on it, a record that is easy to read by those who understand the simple language of the land." So in essence, our management is written on the tapestry of the land. We cannot deny what we see, but we often try. We try hard to do that. And then this quote by Don Campbell: if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. If you want to make major changes, change the way you see things. So that's what we're going to try to do today, is change the way we see things. At our farm in Alabama, BDA, this is our team there. These are the people that I rely on a day in, day out basis. And this is a fabulous team. We love the folks there. They take pride in what they do. And at our farm in Mississippi, we have a really good team there as well. We do a lot of ranching and grass finishing, but this is what it's all about for us, building life. There are several indicators that I want to point out today that show us whether we're making good progress or we're digressing, if we're regenerative or we're not. The first is insects. If we are seeing more and more insects, then we are building life. But yet, and I asked this yesterday, yet for a lot of farmers and ranchers, how do they view insects? Kill them, pest. We got to get rid of them. Boy, have we thought about that wrong. The more insects you have, the more vibrant and alive your land is, the healthier your plants are going to be, the healthier your soil is going to be, and the healthier your animals are going to be, and ultimately the healthier we are going to be. So we want to see a lot more insects out there. As a matter of fact, the work of Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, who is an advisor to our company, Understanding Ag, Jonathan's work has shown that there are a minimum, if we are farming and ranching regeneratively, there are a minimum of 1,100 beneficial insects for every one pest. But our problem is, for many farms, you never see that because we do what? Because we spray insecticides to kill the pest. So we never see the beneficials because is there anything that we can spray that is target organism specific only, that only kills just what we're spraying to kill? No, not a darn thing. So our problem is many of the insecticides that we're using also kill many of the beneficials. And because we're using all the herbicides and fungicides and everything else, we are destroying the habitat for the beneficials to exist on our farms and ranches. We see this in row crop fields especially. We see this in grows and orchards especially. You don't have them there because you don't have the habitat there, because we have been taught that anything else that grows there practically is draining nutrients and water from the crop that we're relying on. That's what we've been taught, rather than the reality that all of these different species, including different plant species, insect species, and so forth, can coexist and thrive. Not just coexist, but thrive, okay? So that's what we have to come to understand. So insects are a key indicator species. Birds are a key indicator species. The more total birds that we see and the greater the number of species of birds that we see, the better off we are. Showed this video yesterday. All the birds and dragonflies. This is on our farm. I filmed this in August. There are actually 700 head of cows in that video, but you can't see them because our grass was overhead high there in August. And as you turn them into the paddock, and we move every day, into paddocks, temporary polywire paddocks, and they just disappeared into the forage. So what you're seeing is the birds and the dragonflies coming out as a result of their movement into a new paddock and stirring up this incredible array of insects. And then the birds and the dragonflies are having a feast. And they do that every day. So every day when we move our cattle, our sheep, and that kind of thing, all of these birds appear and dragonflies and everything else appear that prey on these other insects and just have a really nice feast. So it's a beautiful system. Yes?
From your experience, can you speak to where you think the origin is of our false narrative about insects and pests and our fear of them destroying our cropping systems? I think maybe it'll help you the root of why I often, even I do this, and it's hard to hear it, not be afraid of insects and pests destroying my crop and taking advantage.
Yes. So a lot of this resides in, and I'm going to talk in a little bit about what we call historical ecological perspective, and a lot of this resides in that, but here's the deal. So we can always discover the origins of most of the things that we believe if we go back far enough and look at, what has happened over time. And certainly one of the key periods in time, now all of that started prior to what I'm getting ready to tell you, but there was a key period in the US and Canada, by the way, both, so all of North America, that really started this whole thing snowballing downhill, okay? And I do mean downhill. And that was the Dust Bowl of the 1930s, okay? The Dust Bowl didn't just happen in the US, it also happened in Canada. We do a ton of work in Canada as well, and the Canadian farmers talk a lot about their 1930s Dust Bowl. So it wasn't just a US, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas center type deal. But when the Dust Bowl hit, it triggered a whole series of events that got us to where we are today. Now, first of all, the Dust Bowl hit because of what? Well, drought, but what created that severe and significant drought?
You mentioned George Washington's comments about wearing out his farm and needing to move farther west.
Yep. So, in that, right, exactly. We don't do that. I'm doing a webinar December the 30th on that perspective. I'll be talking about that as well as a number of other things on that webinar. But what happened? When did the great land rush occur in the Midwest? When did it occur? When was everybody rushing out to Oklahoma and okay, in the 1880s, 1890s, right? Okay, that's when you had all the homesteading that was occurring. If you could go, you could stake out your place, boom, 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 and have free land in the Oklahoma territories. And what did all of those folks do that went and staked out the land? They put a plow to it, right, to the prairie. Now, what were they plowing with? Okay, single tree moldboard plow pulled with what? Mule, an oxen, a horse, right? Pulled by an animal. Single tree plow. And yet, in a span of under 50 years, I want you to really get this. In a span of under 50 years, this vibrant prairie was now a dust bowl. Think about that. And we didn't have the giant equipment, tillage equipment that we do today, right? I mean, boy, we can really tear up ground today. But they did it in under 50 years, created the Dust Bowl here and in Canada in under 50 years with animal-drawn single tree plows. Wrap your mind around that. Then we had World War II. And after World War II, we had all of these companies like Monsanto and others that had been manufacturing chemicals for warfare, for making of bombs and all of that, that the government said, whoa, we need to keep you in business. So now we're going to use all of these chemicals that you were manufacturing for warfare for agriculture. And then we had Norman Borlaug and the Green Revolution, right? Which really has been the Brown Revolution, if we look at it in reality. And that precipitated exactly what you're talking about. Because after the Dust Bowl, what did we not have? We didn't have the habitat anymore for the beneficials and all of that. And so as they started replanting crops and then adding now the brand new synthetic fertilizers that did not exist before then, okay? The brand new synthetic fertilizers and all of that, well, yeah, they gave a tremendous response. And that's why people thought that synthetic nitrogen and all of this other stuff was a miracle and it was going to save the world, was because we were putting it on soils that were so incredibly degraded that of course you were going to get a positive response in terms of plant growth because there was nothing else there. The biology was dead and all the beneficials were gone. But as you started adding all of those synthetic fertilizers to get these crops to grow after that point in those heavily degraded soils, then it was an open door, an open feast for the pest insects, and they had no competition. They had no beneficials to fight them anymore. And so they came in, and then we had to develop the insecticides to fight them. And it just snowballed and precipitated. And from there, we've been taught and we've been encouraged and everything else that that's the way you do things in agriculture. So we have had multiple generations now since the 1940s that have believed and been taught in their universities, this is the way you do things. This is the way you combat fungal disease and insects and so on and so forth. Okay? There you go. That's what we've done. So, swallowtail kite, brand new bird species that just showed up on our farm this year. 4 different mating pair. Beautiful birds to watch. I'm just entranced by them. But why are they there? They're there because we have now created the habitat for them to be there. They found us. We don't have to seed insects. We don't have to seed birds or anything. They will find you. If you create their habitat, they will appear, including dung beetles. They will appear, they will be there if you create the habitat. We just have to create the habitat for them. We do pastured pigs. We move our pastured pigs under single-stranded polywire every day. I love the pigs, incredible personality. Boy, you want an animal with personality. Pigs have personality. And when you go out there to move them every day, I actually enjoy moving the pig. I love moving the cattle, but I love moving the pigs even more because pigs are like a gaggle of puppy dogs. When you're moving them every day, their whole body is wagging and they're squealing with delight and everything else. And I swear you can see the little smiles on their faces, and it's like, and they thank you. I mean, they come up to you like, thank you. You're giving us something new to eat. And so I don't know, pigs are just so fascinating to me. So I love the pigs. This is our pastured pork. And we believe that pork is not the other white meat, that it is a red meat and it is meant to be well marbled and not lean, okay? And so do all of our restaurants that we sell it to. They love it that way as well. We do a lot of pastured lamb, hair sheep, Katahdin and Australian white cross. All of our sheep are also contained behind a single strand of polywire on daily moves. So everything we break to single strand of polywire and manage them that way. We do a lot of pastured egg and broiler production. You can see two of our guardian dogs down there. We not only use guardian dogs with the sheep, but we use guardian dogs with the chickens. We no longer use the net fencing that you see there because of the guardian dogs. So we don't have to move net fencing anymore at all with our chickens. We have the guardian dogs, and they protect the chickens from coyotes, raccoons, bobcats, fox, whatever else, as well as eagles, hawks, falcons, and so forth, which we have a bunch of. So it's very easy to manage the chickens and move them every day as well. And they just roam. They're free to roam every single day. But what is surprising, they only go within a certain radius of their houses. And actually what you'll see with our guardian dogs as well, if they see a few chickens sort of roaming too far away, they'll go out and get them and bring them back, okay, and herd them back to the rest of the flock. So the guardian dogs have been just tremendous. We absolutely love having them there. This is our grass-fed beef. We have 90% plus USDA choice and prime on grass-fed without ever a bite of grain in their lives. So we produce this 52 weeks out of the year very consistently. This is also sold to a lot of white tablecloth restaurants as well as our direct market customers. So now let's dive into adaptive stewardship. So one of the things I want us to realize today is that nature will humble you, and if you refuse to be humbled, nature will defeat you. Period. You're never going to beat nature, ever. We can't engineer anything to withstand the forces of nature. Mankind has tried that for thousands of years. We have never succeeded. Nature can tumble whatever we can build. Nature can breach any levee that we can build. It doesn't matter. Nature can beat them all. So why do we keep trying to beat nature? Let's work with her. You'll be far less stressed out if you work with her. I love this quote by Wendell Berry where this was in a 2018 New York Times op-ed where Wendell said, agricultural choices must be made by these inescapable standards: the ecological health of the farm and the economic health of the farmer. Nothing could be more true. And then to follow that up, a quote by Masanobu Fukuoka, the author of One Straw Revolution. He's like the Wendell Berry of Japan. They're both in their 80s now. And Masanobu says this: an object seen in isolation from the whole is not the real thing. This is a core mistake we've been making in agricultural research, and by the way, medical research as well. Okay? And it's the core mistake we have made as farmers and ranchers. We have been taught to isolate things and view them in isolation. In other words, we're not seeing the forest for the trees. Okay? Okay, I want to talk just a little. I talked about this yesterday. I want to expand on it just a little bit today. Historical ecological perspective. This is so important. And we started this with the talk and the question about the insects and the Dust Bowl and so forth. We have to understand where we've been to understand where we can go. If the only thing that we're doing in our perspective about our farms and our ranches is viewing them from the lens of our lifetime or even our father's or grandfather's lifetime, we are making a core mistake because we are not understanding what can really be there once again, what once was there and what can be there once again. So as I was talking about yesterday, if we look at the southern portion of the U.S., it was not like we see it and imagine it today at all. We had a lot of true North American tallgrass prairie in the South. I live in the Black Belt prairie. It was a prairie. But a lot of the black belt today that's not plowed under and planted in corn and beans and cotton is in dense, thick, choked woods. But that's not what it was. It was a prairie. And it was a prairie, and there were many prairies throughout the South, in the Deep South, including a lot of coastal prairies. How were they maintained as prairies? How? Right, large ruminants, wild ruminants that once existed. Bison, folks, once existed from the Atlantic to the Pacific, okay? They weren't just a Western animal as we envision today, and we've even been taught. And they existed from south of the Arctic Circle all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. We know that now. There are archaeological digs of many eastern tribes, Native American tribes, that relied on bison and elk in their diet. And there used to be multiple species of bison, okay? Not just the prairie bison, the bison that we know of today. There used to be a number of different species. And as a matter of fact, the largest species of bison existed here in the eastern U.S. They stood over 7 foot tall at the shoulder. They were monsters. They dwarfed the bison that we know today. They're small compared to some of these original bison. So they were an impactor, maintaining prairie and savanna. Back in those days, we didn't have the dense, thick, choked woodland that we see today. It was very open. It was very savanna-like. It was more like this recreation that you see here in this picture, okay, to the right, except those trees are very young trees. The old virgin pine and hardwoods were enormous, enormous. And there's historical accounts. You can look all of this up. I'm not just spouting rhetoric here. This is all in our history. It's recorded in many different places. And why it hadn't been taught, I don't know. Yeah.
What was your historical fire frequency in the East?
So the historical fire frequency was, from what we can gather about any one acre or any one piece of land, would burn somewhere between about 6 and 10 years, okay? Any one piece of land, right around in there. And they were not like the wildfires that we're having out west today, because you didn't have the decades and decades of buildup of fuel stock that are fueling the ferocious fires that we see out west now. As a matter of fact, that burned routinely too by nature for millennia, and it never harmed. They didn't have the fire tornadoes and the weather now that we now have new weather created by these fires because we have neglected our duty as stewards out there and allowed all of this tremendous fuel stock to build up. We have pyrocumulus clouds and pyronimbocumulus clouds now that create this incredibly severe weather that includes fire tornadoes. That didn't exist before very recently. That's our fault due to improper management of our resources. It's not the fault of climate change like you hear everybody and politicians spouting. It is our fault as failures at land management and stewards of that land. And we have to take on that mantle of responsibility for that. But that was the frequency here. So we know through written accounts, through how rapidly the Spanish exploration parties of the 1500s traveled through the Deep South, like Hernando de Soto and his party of more than 600 men, many of them on horseback with support wagons and a herd of more than 500 pigs that he brought with him. Okay? They travel very rapidly. For instance, I know when they were in the Starkville area, when they were in the Aberdeen area, and all of that, and going on. We know exactly where they were when, through recorded history, and we know that if they had hit here, the Gulf South, and encountered the dense, thick, choked woodlands that we have today, they wouldn't have made a quarter of a mile a day because they'd have had to chop their way through. So it was very open savanna and prairie that they were traveling through, so very different than what we envision today. And then the other two types of the mosaic, the eastern mosaic, were the wetlands. We had grassed wetlands and savanna wooded wetlands. So that's what it originally was, and it was kept open because we had the bison and the elk. How many know that elk existed from coast to coast at one point? So we had the bison, the elk, we had the deer, and actually the antelope, the pronghorn, actually had a far wider range than we think today. They roamed over far more of the North American continent than they do today. So all of these species had a much wider roaming pattern. You know, I put this up yesterday from William Clark's diary, July the 4th, 1804, but I put it up. If you read his description, and I won't read it, I read it yesterday, I won't read it today, you can read it for yourself. That's his spelling, not mine, okay? So I at least know how to spell a little bit better than that, but he was a fabulous writer, but a terrible speller. Okay, or maybe that's how they spelled things back then. I don't know. So he describes a veritable paradise. Donovan County, Kansas, northeast corner of Kansas, just across the border from western Missouri. Look at what he's describing here. Man, I want to live there. But tell me what you would see if you went to Donovan County, Kansas today. Would it? What? Walmart. Sad but true. So, could I go anywhere in Donovan County, Kansas? As a matter of fact, could I go anywhere in Kansas, period, and see what he's describing right there today? Anywhere in Kansas. How many have been to Kansas?
Well, I mean, I live in Kansas. I've never seen anything like that.
There you go. I've been all over Kansas too. You can't find it today, can you? Yes.
If you go back and you read a couple of their journals, in 1802 when they made the expedition west, they could sit in their boat on the Missouri River and shoot with their horrible rifles from the boat and then go get their dinner.
I'm going to show you that in just a second.
When they came back, they had to go tracking their animals
Yep.
because of what the settlers did.
Yep. Isn't that incredible?
2 years, 2.5 years.
So, when was William Clark born? To really drive this point home, historical, ecological perspective, when was he born and where? So somebody from yesterday, you're free to answer. It's not cheating. Okay, the 1770s in Virginia, right? 1770s in Virginia. So think about that. Brand new country as far as the official United States of America is concerned. And he had never seen anything like this in his lifetime up to that point. In the eastern portion of the U.S., we had so devastated and degraded already by the very early 1800s, the eastern portion of the U.S., that this astounded him. This sight just absolutely mystified him. Think about that. So, and how rapidly, just to your point, how rapidly we diminish things. It doesn't take long. So, to your point again, this is the official record of the game that they harvested during their expedition. And yes, the vast majority of this, they rarely ventured far from the rivers at all. The vast majority of this game was killed right by the rivers. Look at that. Staggering amount of game. All right, this is on a client's ranch in northeastern New Mexico, Cimarron, near Cimarron. I want to show you a couple of short videos here on their ranch. We were hosting a Soil Health Academy out there, and I filmed this. Okay, so first of all, I want you to tell me, how many different species did you see in those videos? Okay, there were 4. Okay, name them. Okay, you got it. All right. You get a hat or a book. Okay? But what keystone species is missing? The bison. Okay? The bison. But they have cattle. So the cattle are the proxy for the bison on their ranch. Now, this is more indicative of what the landscape used to be here in North America. You saw elk, pronghorn, mule deer, and white-tailed deer all together, right? We didn't throw them all together. We didn't contrive this. That's how they exist. They actually exist together a lot of the time. And North America used to look a lot more like the Serengeti. The bison didn't roam in herds of nothing but bison with no other animals around them or intermingled with them. That wasn't the case at all. We envision it that way. We think it was that way, but it wasn't that way. It was like the Serengeti. All of this multiplicity of species interacting together. Ground nesting birds, turkeys, and grouse and prairie chicken and quail and so on and so forth that used to exist. And they all coexisted. It wasn't like many conservation organizations believe today that if you want to have ground nesting birds, you can't have grazing livestock because grazing livestock destroys habitat for ground nesting birds. No, they do not. Because we had that grazing livestock, the wild grazing livestock, for millennia, and the ground nesting birds always coexisted with them and depended on them for their habitat. The only reason that they can't coexist today is because we may be a poor grazer. And through our poor grazing, we're destroying the habitat. But it's not the fault of the grazing animals themselves. They don't inherently destroy nesting and brooding habitat for ground nesting birds. They build it if we simulate the way that the wild ruminants grazed and utilized the landscape. And we've proven that today. We actually have worked with Audubon and many others today to prove that. So this quote by George Washington I put yesterday, and I won't read this either, but you can read it. But basically what he's saying here is brand new country, and we've already worn out the soil on the original colonies, the original 13, okay? Already worn it out, and we're a brand new country, and so we're going in search of new and productive soil to the west because the old soil, 1700s, the old soil, he's already calling it the old soil, now scarcely yields them anything. Wow. All right, I covered these yesterday in detail, so I'm not going to go back over them today, but I am going to keep harping on context today. The 4 ecosystem processes, this is what we're trying to optimize because these are the 4 things that are critical to everything that happens on our farms and on our ranches. The water cycle, the mineral cycle, the energy flow or photosynthetic activity, and community dynamics, also called biological succession. What do those 4 things cost us? Nothing. They're free. Every day, they're free. Why in the heck aren't we taking advantage of what's free and supplied to us every single day? Why aren't we maximizing our capture of all of that every day on our land and in our soils? These are the free things that we have always had. And so our job as stewards of the land is to maximize our capture of these four things. Very simple. So we're going to give you ways to do that today. Protect the soil always. I talked about this yesterday. Side-by-side fields, same time, same day, same air temperature, significant difference in soil temperature. We see this all the time. You know, this was in a farm in Mississippi. A couple of years ago, this was in May when I took this picture. Air temperature 85 degrees. This was the first time I'd been out to their farm, and they were conventional grazers, and they wanted to switch to being a adaptive grazer. So with conventional grazing, you understand what happens. Cattle will graze down real tight in certain areas and then leave tufts of grass in other areas. So you get this very patchy, uneven grazing, right? And that's what we saw when we went out to their ranch. And I took the soil temperature just literally a step apart, okay? So where they had grazed down tight at 85 degrees air temperature, the soil temperature was already 109 degrees, and yet a pace away where the cattle had left a tuft of grass, it was only 78 degrees. And then in Michigan, we work with a lot of dairies as well all over the country. And these are some of the Michigan dairies that we're working with now. This particular dairy I'm getting ready to show you is an 8,000 cow dairy. And this family has been dairy farming for generations, so they're not new to the game at all. The guy in the yellow shirt is the current operator of the family, of the dairy. The guy in the gray shirt is Kent Solberg. He is one of our consultants at Understanding Ag. And they're standing out in this was a couple of years ago, standing out in one of the cover crop fields for this dairy. Now, this was the first year, their first attempt and first time to ever plant cover crops. And they've been dairying for generations and had never planted any cover crops in between their cash crops before. So their first experience with cover crops. And this field was pretty degraded, pretty beat up. And this was in August. It had been very dry for them and what they call hot. Now, Wedge, we wouldn't call it hot, okay? But what they call hot and dry. So their cover crop was patchy across this field. And you can see the lighter green areas and then the darker green area where they're standing with a lot more biomass there. So when you get out to some of those lighter areas on the ridges, the cover crop looked like that, the picture to the right. So it got a lot thinner, okay? So here we go, the temperature, soil temperatures. The air temp was 89 degrees, and they just thought it was a sweltering day at 89 degrees. And down south, we think like, man, this is a relief, right? Man, it's not in the 90s or hundreds. I love this. But they thought it was sweltering. So we took soil temperatures at different locations. Now, where Gert and Kent are standing, where we have biomass there, the soil temperature was 79 degrees. Now, the county had recently mowed the roadside, but they couldn't mow where you see those little trees growing up, so they left that. We went into that grass there. Soil temp was 72 degrees. We went out into the cover crop field, that area you saw that was pretty thin, and a lot of exposed soil. It was 118 degrees where they had recently mown, which this would be no different than a freshly mown hay field, okay? 117 degrees. And for kicks, we measured the temperature on the blacktop there, the road there, it was 118 degrees, no difference. It was as hot on the mown ditch and out in that sparsely covered cover crop as it was on the darn blacktop. Now think about it, that's happening to our soils all the time when we're not protecting them and keeping them covered, keeping them armored. That's what's happening. And this is also the same dairy farm. This is also what's happening. Then we went out into one of their cornfields that they cut for silage, and it has a center pivot on it, so they irrigate it. Tell me what you see there. What do you see there? Okay, salt deposits, number one, in the bed, and that's a freshly dug bed. That's not a bed that we, dried out in the microwave. That came straight out of the ground right then and there, hard as a rock. You see salt deposits there, and then to the top right, you see salt deposits, and then bottom middle picture, where water had ponded and pooled from their irrigation, inability to infiltrate the irrigation water. It had created an algal bloom on the surface of the soil, and then the surface of the soil had peeled and cracked. Have you ever had a bad sunburn? What happens when you get a bad sunburn? You peel it, your skin peels and cracks, right? Okay. Well, this soil has a bad sunburn. It's not protected. It's peeling and it's cracking. I'm going to skip that one. Now, here's why the temperature is so important. And I showed the slide yesterday, the chart. I guess I didn't put it in today's, but at 70 degrees soil temperature, 100% of our soil moisture is still in the soil and available for plant growth and microbial support. At 100 degrees, and it's way too easy for our soil to get to 100 degrees, way too easy. At 100 degrees soil temperature, we have already lost in the top 3 inches of soil 85% of our soil moisture. 85%. So only 15% is left to support microbial growth in plants. At 115 degrees, our microbes start to break down. And at 140 degrees, which is far too easy to hit, we've recorded soil temperatures of over 155 degrees. At 140 degrees, we have killed our microbes, pasteurized them. Okay? It's the same as pasteurization. This is a video from one of our clients. They have a dairy farm up in Cold Springs, Minnesota. They milk just under 100 cows and make an outstanding living on their dairy farm with just under 100 cows. They move them every day, 2 to 3 times a day between the morning and evening milking. Single strand polywire. What do you notice here that you would say is, besides the fact that they're grazing even for a dairy, that's not common for the vast majority of dairies anymore. But what else do you notice that is definitely not common for a dairy?
They're not black and white.
They're what?
They're black and they're not black.
Calves by their side. Whoa, wait a minute. Now, none of those are steer calves or bull calves, okay? All of those are heifer calves, but they raise their replacement heifer calves on the cows as a dairy farm. Now, this afternoon, when I talk about epigenetics, I'm going to talk a lot more about why that's so critically important epigenetically. It gives them profoundly positive benefits to do that. But the vast majority of dairy farmers would say, you can't do that. Are you crazy? Are you an idiot? What are you thinking? But they're doing it, and they make far more profit per cow than any of the other conventional dairies around them. Most of the conventional dairies around them are milking anywhere, and they're in Stearns County, Minnesota. Anybody familiar with that county in Minnesota? Largest dairy county in the United States. Okay? There are massive dairies, 10,000, 20,000 cow dairies in Stearns County, Minnesota. They laugh at these guys' dairy. I laugh at them. Oh, y'all are hobby. Y'all are a joke. You're tiny. You know what? They're making a darn good living supporting their family on under 100 cows, and they make far more net profit per cow than the 10 and 20,000 cow dairies that are in their county. that are neighbors to them. Far more net profit per cow. And have a far better life, okay? They have time for their kids. They love what they do. They're not mired in the minutia of a giant dairy. Yes?
Going back one step on your microbial activity and temperatures. Exposures to those temperatures, what is your time span for the death of microbes coming into that, say, 115-degree time span to actually kill all microbial activity and the depth, and then how long does it take to kill the microbial activity?
One day. One day. And we have measured that. Okay, we've gone into row crop fields that are freshly tilled and measured. We've gone into freshly mown hay fields and measured day after day as well, to see what continues to happen. One day, you can significantly diminish your microbial population in a single day. And a little bit later, I'm going to talk, as I talk more about the microbial life underneath the soil, why that is so devastating. So, great question. Yes?
This farm is far better on the environment as well.
Hugely better. When you go here to and they've actually hosted now 2 soil health academies, okay? When you go to this farm, we love these guys. I mean, it's phenomenal. And we started working with them when they were transitioning because they were a conventional dairy as well. So as they made so we've been with them as they made that transition and all the way through. And every year they just get better and better. The life that is on that farm now is unbelievable. The diversity of the plant species that is growing there now, and they're perennial pastures, by the way. These are perennial pastures that those dairy cows are grazing. Dairymen would tell you, you cannot do that. Cows will not milk on perennial pasture. Bull crap. Yes.
Well, it's different cows, but,
Context, yep.
So, maybe you're gonna get to this, or I don't do it, but back to that soil temperature thing. What is the minimum, like, or you're talking about hay fields, like, you've gotta cut your hay. How do you keep, what is the best practice of how do you keep the temperature, like, how much biomass do you compare to the temperature?
Here's what we have found after measuring this repeatedly: no lower than 6 inches.
No lower than 6.
Yeah. Now, for most people hey, that's like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Yes?
Like,
Yes.
that is our biggest complaint with our farmers, they're like, we can't get them lower decks that high.
Bull crap. Bull crap. Okay? That's all I got to say to that one. Yes, you can. We do it. All right? And many of our clients do it. So, why? Why minimum 6 inches? It's important to know the why. Not just know 6 inches minimum, but the why. Yes, shading, because you still leave enough leaf material, okay, there. In the good old rule of compounding, I'm going to get into in just a little bit, but so there's compounding things happening here, okay? So you're leaving, if you cut it down to 3 inches, 2 inches, you're not leaving any leaf material. You're leaving stalk and stem is all you're leaving, okay? So you've completely opened up the ground. How does the sun shine on the surface of the earth? If all you've got is stuff sticking straight up like this, there is nothing to break the sunshine hitting the earth, okay, hitting the soil. You've got to have the shading. So if you cut it 6 inches high, you're leaving at least enough leaf material to be able to still shade the soil surface and protect it. Plus, you're leaving enough root mass underneath instead of having that tremendous root growth stoppage that happens within 48 hours, by the way, of mowing that hay real short. Now you don't have the tremendous root growth stoppage. When you mow it to that 2 to 3 inches, you have 100% root growth stoppage for more than 17 days, okay? You're also protecting and feeding the soil microbes when you mow it that high versus this high. When you mow it this high, you are killing your soil microbes and you're starving them. So it's positive compounding versus negative compounding that we're going to get into on that. So remember this by Albert Einstein: no problem can be solved by the same consciousness that created it. Now, this does not mean the same person can't solve the problem they created, but it means they can't solve it thinking the way they were thinking when they created it. So you've got to change the way you're thinking about that problem to solve it. So what do we not want? Well, this is what we don't want. Okay, conventional grazing. By the way, this is what I see all the time. All the time. I drove from Mississippi to here to Myrtle Beach for this conference, and more than 90% of the pastures that I drove by the entire way in Mississippi, in the states of Alabama, Georgia, and South Carolina, this is the common condition of the pastures I saw. And have we been wet or dry in the Southeast this year? We've been wet. No, wait a minute. We've been wet. We haven't been drouthy. And this is the common condition of more than 90% of the pastures I drove by. That's our fault. That's our fault. Not our cattle's fault, not nature's fault. And then when we have that kind of pasture, now at this time of the year, that's what you're relying on. Wedge, have you ever found a cheap winter feed supplement? What is often our most expensive winter feed supplement? Hay. We like to fool ourselves and tell ourselves that hay is the cheapest thing we can feed. Hay is the most expensive thing you can feed when you count all cost.
Count the loss of the grazing.
Exactly. When you count all cost. Hay is by far the most expensive thing we can feed. And most of the time, it really doesn't do a good job of keeping condition on our cattle, does it? So we find ourselves feeding hay plus, right? Protein tubs, or hay plus this, or hay plus that. So we not only are feeding them the most expensive thing you can feed them in the winter because we have no grazing for the winter, but we're also adding supplemental cost on top of that. No wonder we're going broke. No wonder we moan and groan about we're not being paid enough. It's our fault. André Voisin, famous French biochemist and farmer, died in 1964, but he wrote a lot of biochem textbooks that have been used in universities around the world for decades, but he also wrote books on grazing. And the beautiful thing about Voisin was he was an outstanding observer. Outstanding observer. And in his books about grazing, here's some of the excerpts from it. He says, overgrazing has little to do with the number of animals, but rather far more to do with the amount of time plants were exposed to those animals. If animals remained in any one place too long or returned to it too soon, they always overgraze. Always overgraze. Now, both of those things, staying in one place too long and returning to it too soon, are the two core mistakes that the vast majority of grazers make day in and day out, year in and year out. That's what we do. That's what we do. We stay too long and we return too soon. And we compound it by doing both of them all the time. So he then backs that up by saying one cow grazing a 10-acre paddock all season can kill thousands of plants, and he calls that overgrazing while being understocked. But yet, you can take 1,000 cows and put them on that same 10 acres for just a portion of a day and graze it and not kill a single plant. As a matter of fact, you will actually increase the plant species diversity because the 1,000 cows for a portion of a day on that 10 acres will tap the latent seed bank. and we'll fertilize it, and we'll stimulate the biology, and you'll have far more productivity. In other words, you're simulating nature here by doing that versus the 1 cow on 10 acres all season. Okay, so adaptive grazing is a form of grazing. It's not a prescription, a formula, or a recipe, and I'm going to talk a lot about that. It's a form of grazing that allows us to be fully adaptable and flexible to ever-changing conditions. It produces the greatest results in the shortest period of time. We don't reach a threshold. We've been doing adaptive grazing now for more than 25 years, and we have a lot of clients all over the world and in many different environments that have been doing it now for decades. And not a one of us has reached a threshold. We don't know where the threshold is. What we do know is we're continuing to make incremental progress. And this type of grazing allows the highest level of true net profitability over any other type of grazing that you can do. Hands down. Hands down. But it is not a formula. It's not a prescription. It's not a recipe. I am never going to give you a prescribed adaptive grazing plan. And the day that I do that, you fire me as a consultant, okay? Fire me. Because I would just have done the biggest disservice to you that I could do to you. All right? So I want you to understand that. And I had to learn that the hard way. Keys to adaptive grazing, it is goal-oriented, and we can have multiple goals all at the same time. So it's a beautiful system because of that. It is predicated on stock density, not stocking rate. What is stock density? Pounds of animals per acre, right? What is stocking rate? Okay, acres per head or head per acre, right? We all know stocking rate. We're familiar with that. Everybody defines stocking rate. You know, Extension Service, NRCS, everybody else defines stocking rate in animal units and AUMs and all of that other stuff, right? But this is predicated on none of that. Because guess what? None of that is important. It's stock density that is important. So I never look at the number of head I have in my herd. I mean, I know how many head because I got to keep my records, you know, and all that. But every day when I'm figuring my grazing and how big to build a paddock, I'm looking at the total pounds in that herd. How many total pounds do I have to feed that day? And on the second half of this morning, I'll be covering how you do that when we go into the nuts and bolts of adaptive grazing. Management and flexibility are critical, as are frequent movement and frequent rest. Rest, rest. I cannot emphasize rest enough. This is, if you don't change anything else in what you do, change the amount of rest that you're providing to your pastures between grazings. It will make a profoundly positive result if you increase the rest, not decrease it. And the vast majority are not even coming close to giving pastures the amount of rest that they really need to optimize. As a matter of fact, a lot of the vast majority of the problems that we encounter and that we think are just the way it is, I can't change it. I've been grazing for years. I've been trying this, you know, stock density grazing or mob grazing or whatever for years, and I just hit a wall and I can't change anything. 9 times out of 10, I can immediately track it back. When I start asking you questions, I can track it back to your rest period. And that's your problem.
Check it back to what?
The rest or the lack thereof. The lack of rest. So we're going to talk a lot more about that when we get into nuts and bolts, okay? The other thing that we focus on is plant root system recovery, not solely above ground plant biomass recovery. I want full root recovery, and And later we're going to talk about how do you know that? How do you judge that? Okay? And in many areas of the world, including here in the U.S., it's highly reliant on temporary fencing technology. Luckily today we have outstanding temporary fencing technology, and it's getting better all the time. You know, if you want to do something to really make a difference here, you know, there's room for a lot of innovation and companies to shift what they do and what they manufacture. Jump all over this. If you want to make a lot of money in the future, jump all over fencing technology. That's where it is, folks, and develop better and better temporary fencing technology. But we have clients who have ranches that are pretty expansive, anywhere from several 100,000 acres to more than 1 million acres in size, and in some pretty rugged country. So it's not feasible on some of the ranches that we work on to string all this polywire. But we still do adaptive grazing. How do we do it there? How do we do it? Herding. Yep. Herding, placement of water, and even placement of mineral. All of those together allow us to do it very effectively on more vast landscapes. So, and these cattle learn, and sheep and everything, all species of livestock actually learn very quickly that herding instinct and placement. So when you place them, you know, we can have cowboys and cowgirls on horseback, placing them, moving them, and placing them every day. And when you place them, even without fencing, they learn to stay in a much tighter mob and to stay in that area for that day and to graze there. You're not constantly having, as cowboys and cowgirls, you're not constantly having to herd them and re-herd them and to use your horses as a fence. You're just sort of sitting there watching them. They know. They learn this behavior really, really quickly, and it's highly, highly effective. So, here's what we're trying to do. Optimize the carbon cycle, simulate nature through biomimicry and ecomimicry. So what does stock density look like? I'm showing you 4 different ones: 100,000 pounds per acre, 250,000, 500,000, and 1 million. We do all of those stock densities and many more some of the time, no one stock density all of the time. Okay? I want you to really get that, really understand that. We do all of these and many more different stock densities some of the time, no one of them all of the time. And when we get to disruption, we're going to talk a lot about how to alter that. This is bison. 3,000 head of bison under a single strand of polywire under high density. Now, the beautiful thing about bison is that we have learned that once we retrain them to their herding instinct, they have lost their original herding instinct. And most bison ranchers believe today, are convinced that bison cannot be tightly mobbed anymore. And why? Why do you think that? Because historically, that's how they traveled. Okay? But today, we've convinced ourselves, no, that's it, and you can't do that with bison. And I've had bison ranchers, including Ted Turner himself, tell me that. But guess what? This is one of Ted Turner's ranches. And his bison are now being managed in tight mobs under a single strand of polywire. And in 2006, he looked at me and he said, son, and that's what he called me, son. He looked at me and he said, son, you may be able to do that with cows, but you don't do that with bison. And now on his very ranches today, that is occurring. That is occurring. And it's making a profound difference in the health of the rangeland and in the performance and health of the bison. They are far healthier, and the rangeland is far healthier, moving them every day under high density with a single strand of polywire than their original concept of bison know what to do, just turn them out on the rangeland and let them have at it. Didn't work, doesn't work, never will work. never did work in nature. That wasn't what happened in nature. What really happened in nature with the bison or the elk or the antelope or any of them? What really happened? How were they controlled on their grazing? Predators. Do you know some of our bison herds were so massive that they actually supported 3 to 4 individual packs of wolves on the flanks of the bison herds? Now, how many of you are familiar with wolf packs? Anybody in here had to ever deal with them? So we do a lot of work out west, so we're intimately familiar with wolf packs. Wolf packs stake out their territory, their range, and they don't play nice with other wolf packs. So if other packs get within, 10 plus miles of another pack, you're going to have wolf warfare. So think about how massive these bison herds were, that multiple wolf packs existed on their flanks and didn't interfere with each other. That's huge, folks. That's huge. So the bison, first of all, had to keep moving just to eat, right? In that big of a herd, you had to keep moving just to get enough to eat, so constantly on the move. And the wolf packs on their flanks, as well as the lion and the bear and all of that, keeping them. I mean, if you strayed very far at all from the main pack, what happened to you? You were done. You were wolf dinner. Okay? That was it. So we got to think about how things really were. High stock density can be achieved by many different types of livestock. These are chickens laying hens on our farm in Alabama. And you talk about trample effect. Man, chickens will trample every single blade of grass. They won't miss a one if you got enough of them. It's amazing the trample effect you get from chickens and how profoundly positive that is. So we love chickens in that regard. Recognize any of them folks, Wedge? Mike Kovac, Dave Foster. So that's them standing in our chickens when it came. Everybody loves the chickens. They always come and visit us and want to see the cows and maybe the sheep and maybe the pigs. We show them everything. But then we take them to the chickens, even if they don't want to see them, and they end up staying with the chickens. They don't want to leave the chickens. They just absolutely love it. We were filming a documentary, or we're part of the documentary, and so you see the cameraman back in the back there, and that's John. He's our poultry manager there. Y'all seen the film Children of the Corn? We call this Chickens of the Corn. But this is how our chickens live every day. Okay, and you see their houses there in the background. The houses are moved every day. This is 600 head of grass finishers in a single mob. And so this is us moving our grass finishing mob to a new paddock. So just take up single-stranded polywire and let them move into the new mob. But I want you to pay attention to all the birds. Every day, snowy egrets and wood swallows and all different kind, brown cowbirds and everything else, following the cattle. Eating the insects that are stirred up as they move from one paddock to the next one. So we move our finishing mob usually about 3 times a day, every day, to a new paddock. Again, continuing to filter into that paddock. And this is about the typical stock density that we have with our finishers. Yes, sir?
Is there a certain time of the year that you do most of your harvesting on your finished animals?
We're 52 weeks out of the year. Yes, sir. So we harvest all the time because we have customers that we supply throughout the year. So we're not seasonal. I mean, we have a lot of clients that are seasonal finishers, but we're not. We're year-round finishers. Yes, sir.
So I was curious as to the grass, so I can see that that's a springtime grass.
That was in late May that I filmed that.
So what do you finish them off with in September and October?
Everything that's growing. So we plant some annuals, but our finishers throughout the year are grazing their own annuals and on perennial, on annuals, on perennial. And we don't care about when the final finishing phase is. We're just going back and forth depending on where they are. We also do a lot of leader follower. So we have a main mob that is cows, calves, weanlings, yearlings, and all of that, all in the main mob. We don't sort all of those out into separate herds. We have discovered that's not worth our time and effort to sort them out into separate herds. We keep them all in one main mob. And in the main mob, when those feeders get up to about 800 to 900 pounds in the main mob, we then transition them into the finishing herd. So the finishing herd are going to be animals that are a minimum of 8 weight and up, and they always go first. So whether we're on perennial or whatever, we have and I'll show you the diversity in our perennial pastures in a little bit, but we have highly diverse perennial pastures, and we're grazing year-round on whatever is there. And the finishers go first. We allow them to take only like the top 20%, and then the main mob follows the finishers and takes it down to about 50%, and we just keep that movement going around the whole farm. Yes?
Are you finishing bulls or are you castrating?
No, these are going to be steers and heifers. Yeah, so we're not keeping them intact as bulls. We castrated around 3 months of age average. And yes?
How are you maintaining your chickens? How are you maintaining that kind of chicken density with no wire?
The chickens actually they tend to stay within a pretty constant, I mean, they'll spread out a little bit through the day and then come back together and spread out and come back together. And they do that throughout the day. We call it a radius of impact. It's very predictable. We know exactly every day what our radius of impact will be. And so when we move the houses the next day, we move them forward to the middle of the next radius of impact so that the radius of impact areas join each other every day so that we're getting an even, consistent impact across all of those pastures with the birds.
Following your cattle with the chickens?
Yes. So the same pastures will graze cattle, sheep, that kind of thing. And the chickens will follow the cattle and the sheep because, for multiple reasons, but one is parasite control, right? So the chickens love to eat that fly larvae and worm larvae, that's in those manure pats, and they'll just scratch through the manure pats and break them all up and eat all the larvae. So they're wonderful at breaking internal and external parasite cycles. So they really work well for that.
Year after year, are there any adverse effects that your poultry crop has on, like, your seed bank, their plant health, or is that, have you guys not seen that?
Only if we're not managing them properly, adaptively. Again, adaptive management. If I'm being prescriptive and managing them exactly the same way over and over again, yes, I'm going to see a digressing, okay? But if I'm adaptive in the way that I'm managing these birds and we're altering movement patterns and what we do from year to year, then just like we do with the other species of livestock. So chickens are not exceptions to adaptive management. See, this is one of the problems with a lot of pastured poultry management. They're not being adaptive in the way they manage them. They're saying that it's pastured poultry and all of this, but they're not being regenerative and adaptive. Okay? They're actually degrading and creating issues over time and narrowing plant species and all of this. Even though they're on pasture, you can make the technical claim they're on pasture, but you can't make the claim they're regenerative. And you've got to manage chickens regeneratively too, whether it's layers or broilers. And that means you've got to alter your rotation patterns. You've got to alter how you move them through that landscape, just like you do any of the other species. It's very important.
I'm sorry, so in that mindset too, I think, keeping the same animals, like, I get that adaptive kind of thing, but, so we have a problem where like, everybody wants chicken and nobody wants beef, and so we have, you have chicken and chicken and chicken and chicken, and that's what the consumer wants, but you only have so much land, and so then you wind up having chickens, like, and then, but you don't, at some point, your farm has to not have chickens so that you can have something else, or pigs, and, yeah, I don't know, I don't think it's a hard thing to change your market species, because the market demands something, but your land is demanding something else.
Well, what I will tell you is this, and I'm absolutely convinced of this now because of what we and many others are doing with pastured poultry, both egg production and broiler production, is that we could go to 100% pastured production and produce as much broiler as we need and as many eggs as we need. We do not have to have the commercial type production to do that and to, quote, feed the world. We do not. You can do it all on pasture and you're far better off. It's easy. This is not hard. It is so easy to do this pastured production. And everybody that has cows or sheep or whatever can easily add broiler and egg production to their farm as a complement, as an add-on. And it complements what you're already doing. And it adds another revenue stream, a really good revenue stream. This is not hard, and it makes a lot more money. Folks, for every 1,000 laying hens that we have, for every 1,000 bird units, so we calculate everything for us in 1,000 bird units, for every 1,000 laying hens, we net $40,000 to $42,000 a year, labor included, covering labor and everything, for every 1,000 laying hens on pasture. Now you tell me you're going to get that same net per 1,000 birds in a commercial laying house. Not even close. Not even close. Okay? So everybody can do this that has land. You don't have to put them up in highly concentrated units in environmentally controlled houses and do it that way to feed the world. Absolute myth. Absolute myth. Okay? Yes?
Well, just on that topic, how do you build competency and skills? Because a chicken is not a cow, it's not a sheep, it's not a goat.
Well, the same way you build it and everything else, you have to educate yourself. You know, and look, farmers don't know how to inherently do regenerative or adaptive. They don't. They have to first get their education. They have to take the time to learn to do this and to do it well. You're a business. In any other business, you have to learn. You have to keep educating yourself to be successful in any other business known to man, but somehow in agriculture, we think that's not applicable, that we don't have to keep learning, that we already know it. It's not true.
And I want to make a comment that if you're a cowman and you don't want to deal with chicken, I guarantee you can find somebody to lease your land and rent some chickens on there, along with your operation, and you get a little extra. You may not make a profit, you get a little extra on the side.
Now, that is a beautiful point, and we're actually doing a lot of that. We have a lot of clients, and we match up a lot of people that are doing that precise thing. That if all you want to run is cows, okay, then that's okay. And let's say Wedge just wants to run cows, all right? Perfectly okay. But on those same acres, Wedge could have, say, a young person or a young couple that wants to get into farming, doesn't have any money, to be able to buy land and that kind of thing. Well, Wedge can say, you know what, put your chicken operation on my farm, and maybe if you want sheep, you can have some sheep on my farm as well. You manage them with my cattle, and they're complementary. They're highly complementary they don't take away from Wedge's acres, they actually add to his acres, okay, by having the complementary operations there. So he's got somebody that has an opportunity to establish another enterprise using his acres. It's going to benefit him, build his fertility, his biology, his organic matter. He's going to be more profitable with his cows simply because he has somebody else there managing some other complementary enterprises. So you're exactly right, and we are doing that very thing, and that is allowing a lot of young people that want to get into regenerative agriculture, they're opening and their opportunity to do that, and that's a wonderful thing. Yes? Did you have? Yeah. Oh, okay. Gotcha.
One more.
Yes.
From the orange man. Chickens, how many acres of your land does it take for a family?
So we can run easily 8,000 hens year-round on 20 acres, moving them every day, okay? 8,000 hens on 20 acres. Now, we move them across more than 20 acres because we want their impact on as many acres as we can possibly get it on. But, we can't get, poultry impact on every acre we have. I wish we could, but we can't. But we like to get it on as many acres as possible. But it is easy to do I know this for a fact, it is easy to do 8,000 hens on 20 acres and not have any negative impacts whatsoever. That all the impacts are positive.
But they move to other acres.
We do because we want the impact, but we could easily just rotate them and alter the rotation patterns each year and alter the other species integration each year to have planned disruptions, which I'll talk about in a moment, and still get a very, very good impact. Yeah. But think about that. So, so first of all, add that up, folks. What does that add up to? For 8,000 hens, how much net annually is that? Okay. On 20 acres, how much net is that per acre for chickens alone? Okay. How many of you are netting $16,000 per acre? How many? And that's just chickens. It's just chickens. Guys, this ain't hard. It's just that we don't want to entertain it, right? What's the first thing that comes to our mind? All the reasons why we can't do it, right?
Well, I'll raise a, I can't do it.
Okay.
Because I'm a retailer, so I need food safety. So I could probably buy your beef because you can slaughter it in the USDA FSIS inspected facility. I don't buy small ruminants, so, you guys can have that. But for poultry, I also need that in a properly inspected facility and food safety and food quality. So maybe it's put it on the parking lot, but that's what I'm sitting here.
You can't buy pastured eggs because of food safety?
No, I can buy pastured eggs, I just have to also consider food safety in everything that I do, right?
Yeah. How does a pastured egg violate that in any way, shape, or form?
Eggs, fine, but broilers, that's, I guess.
USDA inspection on farm. Yeah. We've got a lot of people, a lot of clients that have built their own USDA inspected facilities right on farm for broilers. It's USDA inspected. How's it different than the major plants, than a Tyson plant or a Sanderson Farms plant? It's USDA inspected. As a matter of fact, it's better because they can see every bird. That inspector can more fully inspect every single bird. How many of you ever been in the big plants? The Tyson plant or Sanderson Farms or Pico or any of the others? Many, many years ago, I was a USDA FSIS MPI. And I can tell you right now, in the major plants, standing on a line as an inspector inspecting a bird, do you know how long you have per bird? per bird to inspect a bird? Somebody tell me. 2 seconds. 2 seconds. And you're doing that hour after monotonous, boring, god-awful hour. Bird after bird after bird. You're bored out of your ever-living mind as an inspector. How well do you think they're doing their job day after day after day, every 2 seconds? Think about that. That's cook the heck out of them, right? Okay? But on these small, I'm gonna contend, folks, that the birds produced from these individual farms and on-farm USDA inspection are far safer. And as a matter of fact, I can support that through microbial testing because we've done it. I can absolutely support it. And I can tell you that when you open one of those packages at a grocery store, raised on a regenerative operation and inspected right there on that farm versus a commercial bird, and then you culture them, what the housewife, the house husband's gonna bring home, okay? I can guarantee you the pasture birds are gonna culture a heck of a lot better. You are gonna want everything we've cultured out of the commercial birds, you are gonna wanna cook the heck out of it. You better. And you better have Clorox or something to clean your counters and everything else. But on the pastured birds, nowhere near the amount of microbial activity when you culture it out. We've got the data to show it. So, and those inspectors are happier. I know that too from sheer experience. They're happier. They see every bird for a lot longer. They can do a much more thorough inspection. You are actually under far more intense scrutiny as a small farm, on-farm USDA plant for birds than you are as the major plants. Far more intense scrutiny. It's far safer, period, because of that.
When you successfully adaptive graze a single species only, like can you successfully be just a pasture poultry farmer?
Yes, you can. Now, what I'll say is you're not going to make as fast a progress as if you have multiple species, okay? But yes, you can, absolutely. But the other thing I'm going to ask too, though, is that why would you only want to have one species? You've got acres. Why would you only want to have one? Adding others is hardly any more additional work, and it's highly complementary. And by the way, it's much more in sync with biomimicry and ecomimicry because nature just never had one species, right? So you're building a much more fully functional ecosystem. So you can, but my question will always be why? Why would you waste revenue generating and ecosystem building opportunities? Got a question?
I was stretching.
Do what?
I was just stretching.
Oh, okay. All right.
I had a question on the bird.
Yes.
So, being unfamiliar with the pasture poultry deal, can you describe the slaughter and packaging process for an operation? It's starting up in an area that doesn't have, an organization of pasture poultry.
Yep. So what is happening out there in terms of pastured poultry is, some farmers are working together and building a plant that services multiple farmers that's USDA inspected. And then some are just simply, they're large enough, they may be doing 30, 40, 50,000 or more broilers on their own farm annually. And they're just putting in their own, which would be a very small USDA facility. And, it's got to meet all USDA FSIS regs, okay? So they're fully inspected, so they're not exempt from meeting the regs of a bigger plant. They got to meet all the sanitary HACCP, SSOP regs that any other plant has to meet. And, but you can build those actually for poultry fairly cheaply. It's actually pretty darn easy. And then it's minimal equipment that you need in that plant, and then you got to have the cold storage capacity as well. And for most pastured poultry producers, instead of doing chill vat, we do air dry, which is actually far safer from a food safety standpoint to air dry than you got all of these thousands of birds in a great big chill vat. Are you kidding me? I mean, that's a soup for microbial, contamination, because all you need is one bird that's heavily contaminated thrown into that soup with the other thousands of birds, and you just spread those pathogens to every single bird in the vat. But with air dry, you don't have that. And by the way, the air drying actually produces a higher quality carcass and eating experience than the vat chill, okay? So most of us that do this on an on-farm facility or one of these, cooperative facilities, we've gone to the air dry. We build stainless steel racks, and all the birds go on the rack and air dry, so you got air circulation all around them, and all of that, and it just works a whole lot better.
So your small organization, the way I understand it, you're almost gonna need that small organization of pastured poultry producers to make this thing work,
Yeah,
to build it.
it requires some collaboration and cooperation, but it's happening. And it's happening more and more now as we get more people into pastured poultry. So the other thing is that we have virtually no sickness whatsoever on pastured birds. And we're deathly concerned about that in, the birds in a vertically integrated system. Yes?
Just another really interesting thought is what do you do with the spent hens? Because today spent hens go to waste. Are you able to create, that chicken for the chicken soup?
There's a thriving market today for spent hens. When I was growing up, and so that would have been the 60s and 70s, okay? When I was growing up, you went to the grocery store and you had multiple kinds of chickens you could buy. You could buy a roaster. We didn't have broilers, and there was no, right, Reg? No such thing as a broiler. You had roasters, you had fryers. Okay, how many people remember fryers? Okay? So all you younger people, all you know is a broiler. You don't know any other kind of chicken exists but a broiler. But we had fryers, we had roasters, and we had stewing hens. And that's the spent hens that you're talking about. How many people remember stewing hens? You bought stewing hens at the grocery store, okay? And many people bought those to make soups and broths and that kind of thing out of. Well, that's being reinvigorated with consumers now. Do you know that the broth industry in the U.S. last year was over a $6 billion a year business and still growing rapidly? So the bone broth business has exploded because of people's interest in health, because bone broth is very, very healthy. So we're able to take our spent hens and make really good money on them. We average $20 a spent hen. Okay, so we harvest our spent hens ourselves, and we can market those for people wanting to make soups and broths and things like that, and they buy them up like crazy. So we have no problem with plus we do our own pet food as well. So we take our spent hens and some of the spent hens, and they're part of what we put into the mix for the pet food. Yes?
Animal welfare, the spent hen part of eggs is pretty terrible. When you're pulling chickens out of a cage-free house.
Yes.
Caged house.
Yes.
Have to euthanize them, and then they just go around. So that's
Right.
fast to present.
It is, our chickens live a great life until the day we harvest them. If I was a chicken, that would be the life I wanted to live, for sure.
I'm assuming, since I'm of the generation who doesn't know what a stewing hen is, it's a whole bird. It's a whole bird.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay.
Used to, that's how you bought all chicken.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, there was no such thing as a cut-up chicken. You didn't buy parts and pieces. You bought whole chickens and you cut them. Everybody knew how to cut a chicken up. And now you hand most people a whole chicken and they look at you with this blank look on their face. What is this? What do I do with it? Yeah, they don't know how to cook it. They'll buy the whole roasters from the grocery store, right? But they have no clue if they buy a whole raw chicken how to cut the darn thing up anymore.
Any chicken diseases on quail and turkey?
You know, we've got tons of quail, tons of turkey. We have no issues whatsoever with the pastured birds. See, that's the thing, folks. When they're raised adaptively, regeneratively on pasture, we simply don't have these disease problems that are commonplace in the more conventional situations. All that goes away because we have things that fight the pathogens. Okay, we don't have the pathogen buildup to begin with that you do in these other operations. We have what?
You have sunlight.
Right.
Operation.
We've got sunlight. What does sunlight do to pathogens? Takes care of them. Okay? So we've got sunlight, we've got incredible soil microbial populations that also help take care of the pathogens, you know, and we've got all of these other interacting species that help to take care of the pathogens. So what we consider to be common knowledge or whatever, you know, sound science, and I hate that term. As a scientist, I despise that term because people use it wrongly. I read peer-reviewed publications that are absolutely not sound science at all, and I can rip it apart from a science standpoint, and it's called sound science. So don't use that term. Don't tell me sound science. You know, bull crap. And show it to me, and let's actually read it, okay? But when you look at the science between the two, see, that's what they're not doing, okay? They're using one science measured in this context and trying to say that that science and those results cover all livestock production, all chicken production, and it's all that way. No, it's not. It's the science is the exact opposite over here. The data is the exact opposite. That's our problem. We take all these LCAs, you know, life cycle assessments and all of this other that were measured in degraded systems under conventional production and then try to say they apply for all livestock production. Absolute bullcrap. It's not sound science when you do that. You have just taken science that only applies to this and immediately taken it out of context. And the moment you do that, you have made that science anecdotal. Okay? I actually wrote an article on that and published an article on that all science is ultimately anecdotal. That was the title of the article. Okay? All science is ultimately anecdotal because the very moment you take any research out of its very strict, narrow context and you try to extrapolate, which is what all scientists do. Right, Hank? They all do it. Try to extrapolate it out of that immediate context and then say it applies to this and this and this too, that's out of the context. It's now anecdotal. It is no longer sound science. It is anecdotal. But they try to frame it under the umbrella of sound science. Don't make that mistake. Don't let yourself fall into that trap.
Because you're in a migratory flower, you would any thought today and how you
Absolutely. We've never had a problem with it. Ever. Ever. Again, why do animals get sick? Why do we get sick?
not really exposed to.
Well, no, because we're all exposed to things pretty routinely. One of you may have a cold in here today, okay? So we're all going to be exposed. But one of you may be actually harboring the flu. And all of us are going to be exposed. Some of us are going to go home and not get sick at all. Others are going to go home and get sick. Why? We're all exposed, The ones that didn't get sick because of we have a stronger immune system, right? We're healthier. We have a stronger immune system. The ones that get sick, their immune system is compromised. It's the same way with all our livestock, with all of life. And so even if our animals are exposed to avian influenza and all of that, if they have a very strong immune system, so what? Doesn't impact them at all. But if they're weak,
Government wouldn't come in and kill everything if they found out about it.
oh, they may do that. I can't tell you what the government will do or don't do. Yeah, yeah,
Well, you're also providing more for the mental and emotional health of the animal.
that's exactly correct.
Most farmers say the chickens are little dinosaurs, and I suppose you can make that analogy, but they really do have a need for, social behavior,
Yes, yes,
foraging behavior, for roosting behavior, pigs need to root, and, lighting soil. So like, we're providing all of these things with these systems, and that is part of why the animals are a bit healthier, because they're getting all the things they deserve, as opposed to the things we think they need in the farm. So,
and that is why, that exact reason is why everybody, 100% of the people that have ever come and visited our farms love the chickens and hang out for a while with the chickens. Even if they have no interest in chickens and have never been around chickens in their life, they immediately notice that about the chickens, how happy they are, and just they delight in just watching them. I mean, these chickens are running around and foraging, and they're snatching bugs, worms, whatever happens to pop up, and it's amazing too. If a grasshopper comes through, the first chicken will see it, and then you'll have a whole bunch of chickens. They're all like, all going after the one grasshopper, right? Yeah.
But I was thinking, the pigs, how do the pigs not store the pasture?
Moving them every day. Moving them every day. If we move them every day, we don't have any problem with that whatsoever. Okay? None. So that's how you keep pigs from destroying pasture. You got to move them every day, and you got to give them an appropriate size paddock every day, and that takes observation. Adjusting paddock size every day based on that impact so that you don't get a negative impact. But if we move our pigs every day, we never have an issue whatsoever. Where we are down in South Alabama on our Alabama farm, we like to say we have every biting critter known to man. Okay? So we've got ticks, we've got chiggers, we've got fire ants, we've got mosquitoes, we've got, of course, every poisonous snake that you can think of. We've got cottonmouths, and we've got copperheads, and we've got rattlesnakes, and so forth. And I always tell people, if you don't want to get bit by anything, you go to our chicken pastures, okay? Because there is not a one of those biting critters survives the chickens. Chickens are what? Even the fire ants. Chickens are opportunistic eaters, just like a pig. They eat anything that crosses their path and eat it very happily. And so we don't have chigger problems. We don't have tick problems. None of that. You won't get bit by anything. You may get pecked by a chicken, but you won't get bit by anything else when you're out there with the chickens, and you never have to worry about a rattlesnake or a copperhead or a cottonmouth or anything like that. Because if one of those even dares to try to crawl through the chickens, it's chicken food, okay? Immediately. I mean, they're just like on it like crazy, and it's done. It's supper.
this may be very naive, but tell me now why chickens are different than pesticides.
Chickens are different than what? Pesticides?
Like, tell me the story of why now chickens, if they're eating all the insects, and all the insects are now dead in these chickens, like what makes that a part of the system as opposed to being
Well, they're keeping it under control, okay, and in balance. Keeping it under, everything in nature is about balance. So they're keeping those pests. It's not that there's no pest, but it's that wherever the chickens are at that point in time, so all around us in the other areas, you still got all of that, right? But right there at that point in time, so they're helping to keep all of those pest populations in balance. And a fire ant mound, they love a fire ant mound. You can have a fire ant mound this high, and they'll have it flattened in a matter of minutes and scratched all up, and every ant and every ant larvae, they have just devoured, absolutely devoured.
And they also turn it into fertilizer.
That's exactly right. They turn it all into fertilizer. So they're a balancer. They're a balancer of the population. Let's take a break. Quick little story before we dive back in here on historical ecological perspective. So one of our clients' ranches is located north of what's the name of the town there? Anyway, it's western Colorado, okay? And no, not Durango. Darn it, it'll come to me a little bit. But anyway, they're in western Colorado. So it's, pretty much now high mountain desert, okay? And they've got right at 500,000 acres there on that ranch there. And they have, their ranch encompasses 3 mountain ranges and 2 primary valleys. So today, on that ranch, and it had been managed for decades now very, very conventionally. And they had been managing it conventionally. But then they heard about regenerative and visited some places, some other clients of ours, and decided we want to do that here. So they had us come and, help them with, and of course we're still working with them today, but help them get all their everything set up and going on adaptive grazing and regenerative management. That ranch today can support up each valley about 300 to 350 head of cows on an annual basis. 500,000 acres. Tells you how desert it is, okay? All right. But historical ecological perspective. So when Francisco Cortez came through that area back in the 1500s, we have written records of his description. His party, his exploration party, actually passed Grand Junction, Colorado. There it is. Actually passed through the present-day ranch. Okay, through that same ranch. And they describe the valleys and the mesas, so it's got valleys, benches, mesas, and then ridges, and they go on all up to over 10,000 feet, okay, in the mountains there on the ranch. But they could not travel with their party through the valleys. They said the grass was so high and so thick that it was prohibitive to travel through it with their exploration party. So they were traveling on the benches, and they discovered that's where the Native American trails were, on the benches. So the Native Americans were not traveling through the valleys, they were traveling through the benches, on the benches, up above the valleys, because it was easier. And they described those valleys, again, the grass being very tall, very thick, okay? They described it as being over the head of their horses. And they said that those valleys were filled with bison, elk, deer, antelope, and moose. A lot of moose. And to have moose, what do you have? Water, okay? So the valleys were filled with game. And then in the 1800s, when the first ranchers got out there, and this was in the late 1860s, early 1870s, when the first ranchers discovered that, they were enamored by the grass in what today looks like a desert. Okay? And originally, those original ranchers were shoving, get this, 10,000 head of cattle up each valley every season. 10,000 head of cattle up each valley. And there was enough water and grass to support 10,000 head of cattle in each valley every grazing season. But in a short enough period of time, because it's still a fragile environment, always was, in a short enough period of time, due to them repeatedly doing that and overgrazing it, they started devastating the grass. Well, then the sodbusters saw it and wanted to farm it. So the ranchers got disinterested because it wasn't feeding as many cattle anymore because of their overgrazing. And the farmers moved in. And then the farmers, but it was still too wet for the farmers, so they took mules with pans. How many of you are familiar with that? Okay? Believe it or not, even when I was growing up in the 60s, my granddaddy still had the pans that were pulled behind mules. So I know exactly what they look like and exactly how wide they are. So they took a pan with mules, those farmers did, and dug little ditches with a pan to drain water out of the valley. These ditches were that wide, that deep, okay? So you could easily step over them. A person could just step right over the ditches. Today, so fast forward again, those valleys will not support more than 300 to 350 head. Right now, they're vastly improving, getting better fast because of the adaptive grazing. So valleys that once supported 10,000 head of cattle every year will now support only about 300 to 350 head of cattle a year. And those ditches that were originally dug, if you went out there, you think they're just natural streams, okay? But they were not. They were ditches dug by the original sodbusters, the farmers. Those ditches now, when you go out there, in places are more than 100 foot wide and 40 foot deep due to erosion in that shorter period of time, okay? That's historical ecological perspective. But most people that go visit that country today think, this is what it's always looked like. It's always been this way. No. Just that short a period of time ago, it was a vast, highly productive grassland. Think about that, folks. Wrap your mind around it and how quickly we devastate things. But the good news is, with these principles and rules that I'm sharing with you, we can take that exact same land that we severely degraded and we can very quickly return it and restore it, okay? So that's what is so good about this, if we do it the right way. Okay, I showed you this already. I'm going to go through these real quick so I can get into what I call the nuts and bolts, but and we can get into biology and all that. The 3 rules, I went over these yesterday, the rule of compounding, rule of diversity, rule of disruption. So we apply these along with the 6 principles of soil health. When you combine the 6 principles with the 3 rules, very powerful tool for rapid improvement. So the rule of compounding. First of all, no matter what you're grazing, these rules apply. It doesn't matter, okay? All right, rule of compounding. There's never any singular effects, period. Never. In nature and in biology, you do not have singular effects. Everything is compounding and cascading. When we spray something, it never has a singular effect. It never just impacts a target organism. It impacts many, many other organisms. So it's compounding, cascading. When we apply synthetic fertilizer or we over-apply applied manures, it never has a singular effect. They have a compounding, cascading effect that impacts everything else out there in your ecosystem, above and beneath the soil. The other thing about the rule of compounding is that we never have neutral effects. No such thing. They're either positive or negative. Nothing's neutral in life. It's either positive or negative. So the question we have to ask ourselves every day as managers, as stewards of our land, is what we're doing producing positive compounding effects or negative compounding effects? Because make no mistake about it, it's doing one or the other. One or the other. And as researchers, we have to ask ourselves that same question. Is what I'm researching and the observations that I'm making in my research, am I going to be responsible as a researcher in what I'm now going to transfer that knowledge to my stakeholders? Am I transferring knowledge that's going to allow them to create positive compounding effects or negative compounding effects? Which one? Because you are doing one of those two, period. Period. You cannot escape it. And this applies to epigenetics. This afternoon, I'm going to dig into epigenetics because this is so critically important for successful farming and ranching operations. So I'm going to get into that this afternoon and save that for then. This is a cow. An example, we could have taken a picture of almost anyone in this herd. This herd is located near Bismarck, North Dakota. They've been in 6 straight years of drought. 6 straight years of drought. This year, their drought was in the exceptional category. Got less than 2 inches of actual precipitation for the year to date. Okay? Look at that cow. Does she look like she's been in exceptional drought all year, or much less 6 years? That's an epigenetically sound cow. That's Gabe Brown's herd. All of his neighbors have either totally destocked or destocked significantly. Gabe has not had to destock, okay, in spite of 6 years of drought. Second rule, rule of diversity. We want diversity, first of all, okay? So we got to wrap our minds around that. Who is the only creature on the face of the earth that creates a monoculture? Us. Us. Nowhere else do you ever find a monoculture of anything. Insects, microbes, plants, animals, birds. You never find a monoculture where nature is in control, ever. Where you find monocultures is where man is in control. So we're responsible for all the monocultures. That also means we can change that. If we're the ones that created the monocultures, we can change that scenario. And we can create diversity. We want diversity and complexity because that's what is going to allow us to be able to function with nature rather than against nature. And that's what's going to allow us to be able to wean ourselves off of all of these harmful inputs that we think we have to profitably farm and ranch. We haven't used a chemical or a synthetic or anything like that on our farms in at least more than 12 years and maybe longer. I don't even recall now, but at least 12 years. Not a darn thing. Because we don't need it. We just flat out don't need them anymore. And yet all our neighbors are still using them. Okay? So they need them, we don't. What in the heck are we doing? Are we just lucky? No. No luck in that, exactly. So what do we want in that diversity then? Well, we want not just multiple grass species or legume species or whatever, and diversity that way within species, but we also want diversity within all the functional plant class groups. And there's 4 primary functional groups: grasses, legumes, forbs, and woody species. I actually want all 4 in my pastures. Did you hear that? I want all four. I want woody species. Yes, I said that. I want them. They're beneficial to me. Do I want them to dominate my pastures? No. But do I want them there? You bet I do, because they're highly beneficial. And I'm going to explain later why. Okay? But I want all of these present. They're very critical to me. Why? Why do we want diversity? Because diversity creates complexity and positive compounding cascading effects. We get a whole host of very positive, as a matter of fact, thousands of positive secondary and tertiary plant compounds, also called phytonutrients. The work of Dr. Fred Provenza and others. Fred and his colleagues have spent more than 40 years doing this research. And that research has had a profoundly positive impact on the way that we view diversity out there and the contribution of that diversity. We also get a diversity, if we have diversity in plant species, it creates diversity in the microbial species beneath the soil surface that are working for us every day. It creates diversity in the macroorganisms that are out there. And it creates, the impacts are exponential rather than linear in nature. Okay? So, I talked about this yesterday. I'm going to do it again. Define a weed. We have some new people in here that weren't here yesterday. Define a weed. And even the people yesterday. Plant you don't want. What else?
Plant in the wrong place.
Plant in the wrong place. What else?
Anything the cows won't eat.
Anything cows won't eat. Okay, I've heard a lot of people say that. What else? Okay. So I ask this wherever we go, literally all over the world I ask this. So it doesn't matter whether I'm speaking in the UK or Australia or New Zealand or wherever, I ask this exact same question. I get the same definitions no matter where I go in the world. The same darn definitions.
I think you have to use that in order for everyone to know what you're talking about.
Right. Absolutely. I agree. So I get the same definitions. It doesn't matter where I go. If they're ranching in the desert, I get the same definitions of a weed. Okay? But here's the deal. I've never, ever been given and have never read in a weed science textbook an objective definition of a weed. There is no such thing as an objective definition of a weed. Every definition that you can possibly tender to me of a weed is a subjective definition. You're the determiner of whether it's a weed on your place, right? You determine that. If you're a corn farmer, what's a weed? Anything but corn is a weed. But yet, if you're a corn farmer, typically you're doing a corn-soybean rotation, right? So the next year when you plant your soybeans, what may grow up in the beans? Now what is a corn? A weed. No, wait a minute. You just told me last year it wasn't a weed. Now you're telling me next year the corn, well, which is it? Is corn a weed or not? You get my point? Okay. And actually what grows in a lot of people's corn and soybean fields, I love in my pastures. It's great forage, but they hate it. They're trying to spray it out, right? So a weed is a plant that its definition is in the eye of the beholder only. There you go. But I'm going to contend there is no such thing as a weed. They don't exist. Weeds do not exist. That's a figment of our imagination.
But are there plants that cause ecological disruption in a bad, with a negative effect?
Only out of the right context. Only out of the proper context. See, that's where context keeps coming in here. You cannot escape context. Why did the weed exist to begin with? You think nature produces a weed that has no context? No. Every plant has a purpose, but within its context. See, it's when it gets out of its context, and all plants get out of their context because of what? Us. Exactly. Okay? They're out of context because of something we did. We did it. We caused that plant to be out of context. That plant didn't just uproot itself and go somewhere else. okay? We're responsible for that. So we have to understand that. So every weed has a purpose. Every plant that grows has a purpose. So whenever we see something there, ragweed, pigweed, sumac, or blackberry, you name it, I don't care, multiflora rose, keep naming. But everywhere we see something, we have to ask ourselves, why is that one growing there at this particular point in time? Because whatever weed happens to be dominant at any particular point in time, is that the only, quote, weed seed in that seed bank? Oh my goodness, no. Certainly not. There are many, many different types of forbs or, quote, weed seeds in the seed bank of everybody's seed bank, right? But you don't see them all growing at the same time. So why do you see this particular one or two dominating at a particular point in time? It's because nature put them there to grow there at that time to resolve an issue that we created in the soil. They are there to heal the soil. They are nature's first line of defense. And what is the first thing we want to do to them? Kill them. Mow them down, spray them, whatever. That's the very first thing we want to do. Oh my God, it shouldn't be there. And it's the very thing nature put there to most rapidly heal the scar we created. You know how I prove this to farmers and ranchers? I tell them, take me to wherever you have a weed problem. And we take whatever they think they're doing that is right, and I take a shovel. We always carry a shovel with us, always, to do the shovel test, okay? It is the most profound test you can do. You take that very expensive high-tech tool called a shovel, okay? And you stick it in the ground, and it can teach you far more than many of these other high-tech tools that we think we got to use. Now, do I use the other high-tech tools? Yeah. But the most important tool I ever use is a simple shovel. So I go to wherever they think they're managing well in their pastures or whatever and stick the shovel in there first before we go to where they think they have a weed problem. And inevitably, when I do that, I find plated soil, low to no aggregation, crusted on top, problem after problem, highly bacterial, bad aroma, on and on and on. And then I say, now let's go to where you got all your weeds. We go there and stick the shovel in the ground. The soil is better and often profoundly better every single time. When we go there versus where they think they're doing a great job. It's always better where the weeds are growing.
In those two instances, can you just smell the difference? Do you have to touch it and see it? Can you just smell the difference? Is that enough for, not you, but the farmer or the rancher that you're with? Can you show them just that?
Yeah. Well, we show it all to them because it all matters, and we show them plated versus aggregated, right? And crusted versus not, biology versus not, very low biology, and aroma. We always have them smell it. And we describe, for instance, if you're highly bacteriocentric in your soils, which too many of our soils are today, the aroma will tell you that right away. Okay, so if you're highly bacteriocentric, you're going to have a slight metallic or acidic aroma. It's almost going to be like smelling a jar of copper pennies, okay? Like smelling a jar of copper pennies. So you're going to have this acidic or metallic aroma to the soil. If you have that, you are highly bacteriocentric. You are significantly lacking in fungal populations and protozoal populations. And we can back that up by doing actual microbial analysis on the soil. And every time your lab analysis will substantiate what the aroma just told you. If it has a sour or musty aroma, your soils have been anaerobic in nature, okay? Sour or musty, they've been anaerobic. If you have a rich, earthy aroma that is unmistakable, it's very pleasing to the senses. Geosmins, Have you heard that term, geosmints, okay? When you smell geosmints from rich soil, it actually interacts with the chemicals in your brain, okay? And it gives you what we call farmer's high, okay? A farmer's high. They really do that. They interact with the dopamine receptors in your brain, the geosmints do, okay? So the aroma of the soil will teach you real quick the microbial status of your soil. So yes, we have them smell the aroma. We teach them that so that they can continue to do this, to examine, what's happening in their soils. So what you want, obviously, deep, rich, earthy aroma. That means you have a far better balance between the bacterial population and the fungal population in the soil. So what is nature trying to tell me? If you've got a lot of dandelions, it's telling you got a compaction problem and low calcium. You've got creeping buttercup. You've got a drainage issue, infiltration issue. Quackgrass is often indicative of anaerobic, which also means an infiltration issue. Compacted, high aluminum. Bindweed, compaction, infiltration issues. Russian thistle, salinated soil. Leafy spurge, boron issues. Chicory, calcium. Hairy vetch, cobalt. Plantain, copper. Canadian thistle, iodine. Lamb's quarter, manganese, so on and so forth. Okay? So what is growing there at any particular point in time from that weed seed bank? Again, that particular plant is growing there in response to the exact problem in the soil at that point in time. I want to let it repair it because it's going to do a far more effective and efficient job of repairing it than I can do. And oh, by the way, everything I just showed you, livestock will eat. We have found practically nothing that our livestock will not eat.
Pigweed?
Oh, pigweed, they devour it. They absolutely devour pigweed.
I have one common mallet.
Yeah.
They won't eat it. They won't eat it. I'm not letting.
Well, they'll learn to eat it.
That's about the only thing I haven't been able to get them to eat. Canadian thistle.
Oh, they'll devour thistle. As a matter of fact, thistle, we've been able to train cattle, sheep, goats pretty quick to eat thistle, and then they learn, and then they seek it out. They'll go find thistle and eat it all the way to the ground, so.
Like with this picture here, are you saying that you have no nitrogen?
No, high nitrogen.
Oh, so it's high.
High nitrogen. And see, we also, why do farmers, row crop farmers, have such a weed problem? What's one of the principal reasons besides their tillage? But what's the other principal reason? Right, constant high levels of nitrogen application. These plants love nitrogen. If you want to grow a lot of weeds, just put out a lot of nitrogen, okay? You just fed a bunch of weeds. Giant ragweed loves nitrogen, but guess what? Giant ragweed is a fabulous feedstuff. Cattle will absolutely eat the ever-living heck out of it, and it's very, very nutritious. So diversity is key, okay? Here's what is in our seed bank at BDA Farm. Yes?
So you gave examples of the type weed and what's taking place in the soil. Is there some place where we can
Yes.
this that tells us why this weed and what the impact?
Yes, there are a handful of textbooks that actually cover this. One is like Weeds and What They Tell Us. If you'll Google that, like on Amazon or whatever, then it'll pop up a list of other books that are comparable as well. But there's actually a number of books out there that cover each of these plants and why they are growing at a particular point in time. So that'll identify to you, if you see a plant, now you know your problem. Yeah. So as you look through this, we have documented at our farm more than 140 different plant species now growing in our pastures. And it increases every year. We get more and more every year. but we've documented more than 140 so far that are growing in our pastures, and our livestock eat every single one of these. We've documented them actively eating all of these, every single thing on that list. We have documented them eating. Yes, sir.
So are you taking any corrective action on ragweed that got excess nitrogen, or are you just grazing that and letting?
Grazing it. I'm letting my livestock and my soil biology correct that problem. Why do I need to chemically correct it? I don't. My biology will correct that problem. I'm going to get into biology here in just a little bit, but it'll correct that problem for me. So why do I want to spend money to correct the problem when I can let nature correct the problem for me? So I let nature do it. But as you look down through here, you'll notice several things. First of all, you'll notice some tame grass stuff, right? Now, we planted none of this, not anything on this list did we plant. It was all existing on the farm when we bought, or the tame grass stuff was existing when we bought it. All of this obviously was existing in the seed bank, but when we bought it, very little of this was showing itself. So it was there underneath the soil, but it wasn't expressing itself. It wasn't germinating and growing, but it was still in the seed bank. And you'll notice several things here. First of all, you notice a lot of plants or things that what we call weeds, right? The second thing you'll notice is there's a lot of actual southern native species there, a lot of natives that have existed for millennia down here in this part of the country, okay? So they are coming back up. We planted none of that. They're coming back up from the latent seed bank. They were there. They were there in the original prairie that once existed here. And they're returning again from our seed bank because of the way that we're managing. And again, our livestock eat absolutely all of this. All of this is food, is forage to me. I don't define a single plant there, even though the name of the plant may have weed in the name, okay? I don't define any of these plants as a weed. I define them as a forage. And I define them as a forage for multiple species because they're forage for our chickens, our pigs, our cattle, our sheep. They are forage for our bees. We have more than 400 beehives. This is forage for our bees. We have something blooming every single month of the year on the farm out of all of this stuff. So nature provides that, and nature provides foraging for our bees 12 months out of the year because of that. This is also food for all of our wildlife, our deer, our turkey, our quail, our dove, and all of the other myriad forms of wildlife that we have there on the farm. This is food for them as well. So we have created, through regenerative management, this thriving ecosystem that has tapped the latent seed bank that is laid there now for more than 200 years, latent, and now responding again. And this is also preventing us from having the common problems of pest, armyworms, you name it, because of all of this diversity. So it's hugely beneficial to us. So we manage for diversity, don't sweat the weeds. Again, the work of Fred Provenza, if we have diverse landscapes, there are our nutrition centers and pharmacies, okay, for our livestock and for us, by the way. The health of everything improves when they have far more diversity to eat out there. How many of you, while you've been here at Myrtle Beach, have gone to eat seafood? Okay, I have to. I love seafood. All right, how many on your plates or platters of seafood this week that had hush puppies on it? Okay, all right. Now, how many of you ate nothing but your hush puppies? No hands? Almost. They are good, aren't they? They are good. If they're made right. I mean, you know the difference between a good one and a bad one. But how many, so none of you ate just the hush puppies. You ate the other items on your plate as well. How many of you would eat nothing but hush puppies for breakfast, lunch and dinner every day of the week, every week of the year. How many of you would do that? I see no hands. If you did that, what would happen? You would die. You would hasten your death, right? You would greatly hasten your death, okay? So you know that, right? You know you have to have a varied diet. You can't pick one food and eat that one food all the time and stay healthy, right? Would any of you do that? Could any of you name one food, just one food that you could eat the rest of your life, no other food ever, and stay healthy? Steaks? Only if they're well marbled, okay? All right, so we know that, but yet we have a monoculture pasture out there for our livestock, just fescue, just Bermuda grass, just Bahia, and we think they're going to be healthy? Where did we come up with that? What brilliant scientist discovered that? That makes no sense whatsoever. We would not do it, but we're forcing it on our livestock. Now we know why we got problems. That's why we have problems. We're the cause of our own demise. We lack diversity. When you have what I showed you earlier at BDA Farm, that's my pharmacy, that's my anthominics, my dewormers, all of that, plus my nutrition. I've got it all rolled into what they're eating every day, okay? So that's why Fred Provenza's work is so critically important. Showed this yesterday, plants with condensed tannins, and this is not a definitive list, there's many more. A lot of these plants, some of them you wouldn't call a weed, but some of them you probably would. But yet, what is a tannin? Why are tannins important in an animal's diet? Because what is one of the core things tannins do? They're a natural dewormer. They are a natural dewormer. Who deworms your deer? Who deworms your deer? No one. Yeah, exactly. So how do deer withstand parasites? They're deworming themselves. They don't care where your fences are. They're not confined by your fences. They go where they want, they eat what they want, they eat a wide, varied diet every day. We're restricting our livestock so that they can't. Take a look at this. Okay, the nutritive value in many of the plants that we call weeds. Folks, this is better than your improved forages. And yet we think our livestock are going to starve on this stuff. No, they're going to perform very well on this. Look at this. Look at crude protein and in vitro dry master digestibility. Okay, somebody talked about pigweed, they'll eat even pigweed. Look at the nutritive value of pigweed there, folks. It's better than alfalfa. Okay?
I noticed yesterday that pepperweed was the highest in the crude protein. What does the pepperweed look like?
It's a vine plant, so it has sort of a greenish and with sort of brownish tint to the leaves and all of that, and it grows along the ground in vines. Mm-hmm. It's pretty common in the South. So this is great nutrition. Once your livestock learn to eat this, they're no longer a weed, they're a forage.
Does that have any impact on like the tomato program for cattle?
Absolutely it does. What we have found is that all of our livestock species, the more diversity in the pastures, the less their reliance on mineral, because they're getting it from what they're eating out of the exact same soils, okay? So get that, folks, all right? You didn't change the soil. You changed the diversity in the soil, so the minerals were always there in the soil, but the problem is your monoculture and low diversity could not pull those minerals up into the plant because you didn't have the microbial activity that you needed to pull those minerals up into the plant. So you're having to buy and supplement mineral. Have you ever found a cheap supplemental mineral? No, ever, okay? Even the cheap ones aren't cheap.
Minerals in that vegetable
That's the kind of mineral I want. Absolutely. So, Russian olive. A lot of people say they won't eat Russian olive. Well, look at this. In 4 hours, completely stripped it. Yes, sir.
Do you have, I know you've done it at some point, but do you have a side-by-side comparison on animal health? So say an example of a stocker operator that's
Yes.
typically running on wheatgrass pasture, whatever, next door to diversified forage and their medical cost and efficiency overall.
Yes, yes. And over again, you know, monoculture or low diversity versus highly diverse pastures, you have far less morbidity and mortality and vet med cost when they have high levels of diversity. They just don't get sick.
Would love to see those numbers.
Yep, be happy to share. Just email me. Yeah. I showed this yesterday. I'll show it again real quick. This is on our farm in Alabama. One of the things on the Black Belt prairies, you can have ash trees trying to come in a lot. So ash can grow pretty vigorously on the prairie if they're not controlled. So this was a patch where we had a bunch of ash come up. Some of these are 15 foot tall or taller. And so this was back in May of this year. We put our main mob in there at a density of about 1 million pounds per acre into the ash. Now, and we've got the whole thing filmed, both from this will be in a documentary, but from the ground level and drone level. What you're going to see is from a drone level. But looking at it from the ground before we put the cows in, you couldn't see through those ash trees. I mean, it was dense, thick, choked. You just literally could not see through them. Okay, so I'm going to show you what happens in under 30 minutes with 1 million pounds per acre. So all we needed them in there was for just a mere 30 minutes, okay? So here they go, 1 million pounds per acre. They're going into the ash and starting to eat the ash and all of that and working on everything that's in there. You know, they would pull limbs down and eat the leaves very readily. They'd even eat, there was honey locusts in there as well. They would eat the honey locust. There you go. Honey locusts, they would eat the honey locust. This is what it looked like after just 30 minutes. So we completely opened it up, opened up the canopy, allowed sunlight to get down, and you could see all through it without any problem in just 30 minutes. And that exploded in grass after that. So now we had a lot of really good grazing available under that, where we had virtually none before, other than the ash itself.
What would you do with the leftover ashes when you take them out?
Oh, we're going to hit it again, and it'll eventually kill those ash.
Even the larger ones?
Yeah, absolutely, it will. Yeah. So we'll hit it again next year like that, and it'll pretty much knock them out. Yeah. Third rule. Rule of compounding, rule of diversity, third rule, rule of disruption. Okay. So nature has tremendous resilience, responds well to challenges, so we can implement planned, purposeful disruptions. So we're going to talk about what those are. First of all, don't do things the same way every time. Now, this is our biggest challenge, isn't it? Because as human beings, we want to be regimented. We want to be formulaic. We want to do the same thing all the time. We got to break out of that comfort zone of that and challenge ourselves to be disruptive. Now, you know, when you were a kid, you may have been called disruptive in school. Now you're allowed to be disruptive. Okay? You can be disruptive on your farms and your ranches. So what adaptive and regenerative is not and never will be, is a recipe, a formula, a prescription. I said it yesterday, I'll say it again. The very moment you turn this into a recipe, a formula, or a prescription, you're now non-regenerative and non-adaptive. It is impossible to be regenerative and adaptive being prescriptive. You cannot do it. Okay? I've read a lot of, quote, peer-reviewed research. It is peer-reviewed research. Don't need the quotes. Read a lot of peer-reviewed research where in the title and in the paper they say we were comparing regenerative management to conventional. We were comparing adaptive grazing to this other, whatever other form of grazing, okay? But then when you parse it apart and you read their methodology and what they really did, no, they weren't being regenerative in their research or adaptive. And as a matter of fact, those researchers, frankly, had no clue what regenerative or adaptive was. You can't do as a researcher what you have never done. Your PhD does not confer upon you knowledge you do not have. Okay? Plain and simple. Get rid of the arrogance and the hubris as a researcher. And I'm saying that as a researcher, okay? Get rid of it. It does you no good, and it's unscientific to have scientific arrogance and hubris. You're not a good scientist if that's what you do. So every one of those, they did not do regenerative and adaptive research. That's not what they implemented. They called it that, but that is not what they did. So be careful when you read stuff and somebody says, well, I read a peer-reviewed article that said this regenerative stuff doesn't work. You can just say, yeah, right. Okay? Because in every one of those studies where they did regenerative or adaptive under their definition, it was highly prescriptive. What they did the same thing on what they called regenerative and adaptive day in and day out. Well, how in the world did you call that regenerative? But they, under their and again, why did they do that? Because they had no clue what regenerative, they just thought they knew what regenerative or adaptive was. Okay. So how can we be disruptive? Alter stock densities. Never stick with the same stock density. I call it pulsing a stock density. Do not move through the same rotations in the same pattern year after year. Alter grazing heights on and off. Alter rest periods. If you're like us and you do multi-species, alter species order from time to time. Alter time of season or year a particular paddock is grazed. Alter paddock configuration. When I get into the nuts and bolts presentation, we're going to talk about that. And even a planned burn, as long as you're not doing them too frequently. As a matter of fact, don't use any one of these disruptions too frequently on any given acre. If you do, you have just become prescriptive and you're no longer adaptive. So don't pick a disruption and say, that's the disruption I'm always going to do. That would be the wrong thing to do. Use all of them on any given acre at different times for different purposes. Dung beetles can be a very positive disruption. Many people no longer have dung beetles. You return the dung beetles and it's amazing what they do for you. Earthworms. There's 3 main types of dung beetles: tunnelers, dwellers, and then rollers or tumblers. When I was a kid growing up on my family's farm here in South Carolina, I remember we had dung beetles, quite a few of them. And especially those rollers or tumblers, I loved watching them. Have y'all seen those? They're the biggest species of dung beetle, and they form a ball with the manure and roll it with their hind feet back. They move backwards and roll it into their burrow. Okay? How many people have actually seen that? Okay, good. At least some of you have. There's a lot of ranchers and grazers that have never seen a dung beetle, ever. They've never got to see that. And I watched them all the time as a kid growing up, and then they disappeared. Why? Right, chemical dewormers. Chemical dewormers are deadly to dung beetles. DDT as well. So we killed our dung beetles. They'll return if you quit using chemical dewormers.
Your previous slide showed dozens
Mm-hmm.
working that paddock.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen more than 2 or 3.
See? Exactly. Now, they'll come back in time, but another problem is this. If all the farms around you are doing a lot of spraying and different things, it's more difficult to have a lot of dung beetles. So it's not just what you do, but it's what your neighbors do as well, because those dung beetles fly. All dung beetles fly and travel. And so they'll fly off to the other neighboring places and get killed with the chemicals. Okay, so that's unfortunate. So when you have to have a really high population of dung beetles, you either have to be a little isolated or you have to have neighbors that are also doing something similar to you. And then you can build tremendous dung beetle populations. So they will come back and they'll show back up in high numbers if we create the conditions. This is a patty. This is just 2 days after that cow plopped that patty on the ground, and those dung beetles have really worked it over. So you can see how fast they can work a cow patty over. And again, look at the number here, on this patty. There's many, many different species of dung beetles. This is just a handful of them, but there's many more. Look at how deeply into the soil they incorporate the manure. Okay? Look at the job they're doing. Why do we not want dung beetles? Why do we not want them? I mean, look at this, man. I mean, I definitely want them doing that for me. So I want as many dung beetles as I can get. And again, I talked about this yesterday. The best tool in your toolbox is observation, using all your senses, okay? Observe everything, because keen observation develops sound intuition. And once you have sound intuition, you make far better decisions, far better decisions. You'll make decisions tomorrow that you never even thought about making today, because you have observed and you know how do you make the best decision in any business. When you read any business textbook, how do you make the very best decision in any business? Gather facts and information, right? Gather all the facts before you make your decision. Well, how do you gather the facts on your farm? Right here, what you are seeing, hearing, smelling every day. Use your senses, your powers of observation. The facts that you gather from the powers of observation on a farm or ranch are critically important. Never downplay them. Never think that that's a waste of my time to sit out here and observe. That's the very best use of your time. All of those other tasks that you do, I can pay a lot of other people a fair wage to do those tasks. And I need to be spending my time as a manager, as an owner, observing so that I can make the very best decision. Never get caught up in the minutia of your own farm or ranch to where you are not taking time to observe. Most row crop farmers, how in the heck do they observe anything? What do they do in the vast majority of the time? Yeah, you got your butt planted in a seat, right? A cab, air-conditioned, climate-controlled cab, your tractors, your combines. Man, you got Sirius XM radio, you've got your devices, you're watching podcasts, listening to things, whatever. You're not even driving them. They're driving themselves. What in the heck are you observing? Nothing. Nothing. Get your butt out of that seat and on the land and make observations. Observe everything. Talked about these yesterday. The 4 most important tools you could ever use on your farm, and you can use routinely. Anybody can use these. It doesn't take even a high school education to use these, okay? Shovel, thermometer, refractometer, water infiltration ring. If you do those 4 things routinely, you will learn more about your farm or your ranch than you have learned in your entire lifetime of being there. Within a single year, you'll know far more about it than you have over your entire lifetime. And you'll be far better informed about the actual status of the health, the soil health of that farm or ranch. And now you're much better prepared to make sound decisions. So the microbiome, now we're going to get into biology, okay? The microbiome. There are, or should be, striking similarities between the microbiome of humans, animals, plants, and the soil. If they are different, we've got a problem. And that problem manifests itself in health issues of all of those organisms, including us. The microbiomes should be remarkably similar. They are intricately linked in either a symbiotic or antagonistic relationship. So we want them linked in a symbiotic relationship. What happens to one inevitably affects the other. And these microbial interactions profoundly impact and produce either positive or negative epigenetic effects in every single organism that has DNA, including human beings. Now, if you took the microbes out of the gut of your cow, what happens to her? She dies. If you took the microbes out of our gut, what happens to us? We die. We are comprised of billions of microbes, both on us and in us. We depend on those microbes every day. We take them away, we die. We take them away from our animals, they die. We take them away from the plants, they die. So this microbiome and getting it right is really important. And we got to remember this, biology grows out. I call it the biological ripple effect. And I'm going to show you a case study this afternoon that clearly illustrates this biological ripple effect. This is how we green the desert. This is how we restore abject deserts to grasslands using this biological ripple effect. And I'm going to show you exact examples of this in our case studies. So, what happens when you throw a pebble in a pond? Okay? How do those ripples start? Small, concentrated around where the pebble entered the water, right? Okay? And then what do? All the way to the banks of the pond, right? Okay? Folks, this is how biology responds. We now know that one of the best ways, the very best ways to restore degraded lands is to first identify what we call biological hotspots on those lands. Start at the best places first, where you have biology, and grow it out. Don't start in the worst places that are heavily degraded. There's little biology there. You got nothing to grow out, okay? Start where you have biological hotspots and ripple it out. And it works. Isn't it amazing how nature repeats herself in her patterns over and over? The patterns of nature are continually repeated. So what you see in one form of nature absolutely repeats itself in another form of nature. All we got to do is observe and recognize that, and we can use that to our advantage. Yes?
The very word suggests to me that it's too little to see. Microbiome.
Exactly.
Where do you begin to observe the ripple? See it with your own eyes.
Yeah, so, and I'll show this in our case studies this afternoon. So you find the biological hotspots, focus your efforts there with our adaptive grazing or regenerative practices there, and you just see it growing out. And it manifests itself in the fact that all of a sudden where plants were not growing, now they're growing. Or where they weren't growing vigorously, they're now growing far more vigorously. That is direct evidence that the biology has improved, because what we did not do was we did not apply fertilizer, we did not seed anything, we did not use irrigation, we didn't spray anything, or we didn't do anything mechanical. All we did was use regenerative practices with livestock, and plants appear and grow more vigorously. And they spread out in a circle all the way around where that biological hotspot was, just like that. So it takes biology to grow biology. Again, focus on the low-hanging fruit first. Identify your best areas, your biological hotspots. What will frustrate the ever-living heck out of you and make you give up is if you go to the worst areas on your farm or ranch first and say, I'm going to improve that right now. You're spitting against the wind, okay? Don't start in the worst areas. Go to the best areas, grow them into the worst areas. When I get into some of the afternoon session, I'm going to talk about how do you strategically do that? How do you do that? How do you take these good areas and the high levels of biology and effectively and in a very implementable way grow those into the areas that are highly degraded? And I'm going to show you pictures of us doing that, time-lapse pictures, okay, this afternoon, of that actually occurring. All right. Mycorrhizal fungi. If you don't know any other organism in the soil, know this one. Mycorrhizal fungi are the catalyst, the linchpin, any descriptor you want to use, the facilitator, the fosterer. They are the key to everything else that happens biologically in the soil. You take mycorrhizal fungi out of the equation as a species, and you are dead in the water biologically. You can do practically nothing. Now you're reliant on external applications, costly inputs, okay? This is what you focus on biologically. Grow your mycorrhizal fungi population. Every ounce of your being ought to be focused on how do I grow my mycorrhizal populations in my soil. Okay, so we're going to definitely cover that today. Mycorrhizal fungi are also what I call, in terms of soil microbes, the jack of all trades. But they're not just the jack of all trades, they are the master of all trades as well. Okay? What they do is they attach you see this pine seedling here? Okay, these are the actual roots of the pine seedling. All of this other is not a pine root. That's mycorrhizal fungi. So they attach to plant roots and greatly extend the reach of the plant roots, far beyond what the plant itself can reach and access. So if we talk about some, and I'm not going to be able to cover all of the things that mycorrhizal fungi do today, and we're still discovering, by the way, new things every year that they do. But I'm going to give you some of the core things that they do that are so very important to us and why we want mycorrhizae in our fields. So first of all, they are far better and more efficient in picking up minerals from the soil, nutrients from the soil, and feeding them to the plant than the plant itself. They do a far better job of feeding the plant than the plant can do feeding itself. Think of this like a newborn baby. Can a newborn baby feed itself? No. Or even if you go up to a 1-year-old, it can feed itself a little bit, but can it feed itself well? No. Okay? So think of a plant like that. So what extends the reach of that toddler to help it feed itself? The parents, right? The parents. All right? Think of the mycorrhizal fungi like that. They are the parents to these toddler plants. They help facilitate the feeding of these plants. And one of the ways they do this Mycorrhizal fungi produce very powerful enzymes that they secrete into the soil and that solubilize all these bound minerals in the soil and then make them available for plant uptake. The plant themselves can't take them up because they're bound. They're bound. But once these enzymes dissolve them, then they're funneled up. So the mycorrhizal fungi are long, thread-like filamentous organisms. They're like a hypodermic needle, so they can suck them up in and then transfer them right into the plant, okay? And as a matter of fact, if you've got a lot of rock, who in here has a lot of rock, okay? Well, you got a ton of mineral. Be glad, celebrate your rock, because if you can build a mycorrhizal population there, you've got mineral stores forever and ever, amen. And the mycorrhiza can take that and continually mine right out of that rock minerals. We've actually got electron microscopy of mycorrhizal fungi doing exactly that. They are nature's expert miner. They actually bore tunnels through their enzymes into solid rock, and then inside those tunnels you can see the pitting of where they've extracted mineral from that rock inside those tunnels. Wow. Okay? The other thing they do, mycorrhizae greatly extend the reach of the plant roots themselves, just like you saw in that pine seedling. Mycorrhizae extend the reach of every plant's root from 600 to 1,000 times. So think about that. All of those mineral stores that are out of the reach of the plant roots themselves, now if I've got mycorrhizal fungi there, now the plant can access those, okay? Whereas before, the plant itself could not. They effectively increase the absorptive surface area of the plant roots hundreds to thousands of times. They greatly extend the reach of the plant roots, as I said, but they also interconnect the roots of all the plants growing in your grove, your orchards, your fields, your pastures. So they interconnect the roots of all the plants. So that produces a plant-to-plant-to-plant instant communication system. So this plant way over here, you could have some plants growing over here where you have a phosphorus deficiency in this part of the field. And over here, there's plenty of phosphorus. The plants over here send a signal through root exudates to the mycorrhizal fungi. Hey, I need some phosphorus. Whew. It's like the world's fastest internet, okay? It's like, think about it like an internet, the World Wide Web. Boom, signal over here, mycorrhiza over here. Oh man, we got plenty of phos over here. Let's ship it over here to the plants that need it. Nature's way of resolving the problem. What's our way of resolving it? Buying phos and applying it, right? And do we ever get that right? No. And by the way, how effective is a phos application? Effective uptake of any phos application. Okay? 30% or less. Are we paying for 100% that we just applied? Yep. We're getting 30% or less effectiveness from it. What kind of business deal is that, folks? Works great for them, but it's a dumb business deal for us. Why do we do that? So, also, if you've got a pest, so you got armyworms over here eating on these plants, okay? And then whoops, we're being eaten on, okay? So they alert and send out a signal, and it goes through the mycorrhizal pathway. And all the other plants, these plants being eaten on are saying, produce volatile compounds right now to protect yourself. And it sends that signal to all the other plants in the field. And now you have far better protection in the entire field from the armyworms. If you don't have mycorrhizal colonization there, that doesn't happen. And now what are you doing? You're spraying to control the armyworms because your plants and microbes underneath the soil aren't existing together in a symbiotic fashion to be able to exert nature's control. They transfer nutrients from one plant to another to another. They transfer nitrogen in the form of organic amino acids from plant to plant. So mycorrhizal fungi, we can use far less nitrogen applications when we build mycorrhizal fungi populations, because now they're picking up organic forms of nitrogen rather than synthetic and inorganic forms of nitrogen and transferring it to plants as their nitrogen source. Oh, by the way, they also preserve and supply water to plants in periods of drought. I'm going to show you a microscopic picture of that in just a little bit. And guess what? How many people have fungal disease problems in your crops? Okay. If you've ever grown a crop, conventionally, you got fungal disease problems. Okay? Folks, look at this. Look at this, that last point. Mycorrhizal fungi are the principal immune system for plants against fungal disease. My gosh, what a waste of our dollars over all these decades of spraying fungicides. And let me ask you something, and answer it very honestly. Over the last 40 years, in spite of all the advancements we think we've made in agriculture, all the scientific and technological advancements we think we have made, and that have been highly touted, have we increased or decreased fungicide use? Increased it. How much? A little? A lot. Well, what in the heck are all of those advancements doing for us? Nature already had the problem solved. We disrupted her. We disrupted the solution. You have mycorrhizal fungi. You don't have a fungal disease problem, folks. It's that simple. It's that darn simple. You can build them. They're there. You got to build their population. Okay? All right, so this is a microscopic photograph of mycorrhizal fungi attached to a plant root. You know, it's sort of like sticking a hypodermic needle in your arm. Okay? They're like a needle stuck into the root of the plant, all over the place. It's like acupuncture, right? You got all these needles stuck in you. Well, this is nature's acupuncture. All right? And what you see there fluorescing is nitrogen being placed into the plant root by mycorrhizal fungi. Organic nitrogen, not inorganic, not synthetic nitrogen, organic nitrogen that already existed in your soils is being placed into the plant root by mycorrhizal fungi. If you don't have mycorrhizal fungi, what is not happening? This. So now what are you forced to do? Go buy synthetic nitrogen to apply. And here we go. You see those this is inside a plant root. All of these are water droplets placed there by mycorrhizal fungi, and the plant will only use those when they get into droughty periods. So if you've got mycorrhizal fungi, you're able to withstand drought a lot longer than your neighbors. Now you see why I call this both the jack of all trades and the master of all trades, mycorrhizal fungi, and why I place such a solid importance on them. So I'm going to finish up this morning, and this afternoon we're going to get into the practical ways that you actually do all of this. Let's talk about bricks. How many people are familiar with plant bricks? B-R-I-X, okay? It's not new. It's been used for decades in the fruit and vegetable industry, right? No self-respecting vineyard would ever not have a refractometer. And they're going to measure bricks on grapes before they harvest them every time, okay? So, you know, it's amazing. When I introduced this to row crop farmers, And livestock producers, they look at me like this is some kind of witch doctory stuff. Plant bricks, refractometer, what are you talking about? You know, that's foo-foo dust. What in the heck are you promoting to us? And yet there's tons of peer-reviewed articles about bricks and the benefit of bricks out there, literally hundreds and hundreds of them. And it has been used in those other ag industries for decades. But somehow when you transfer knowledge to another sector of agriculture, it becomes foo-foo dust. I don't know how that happens, but it happens. So we have discovered the benefit of using bricks in our grazing applications and in our row cropping applications. Man, it's powerful. So bricks is a measure of dissolved plant solids in the sap of a plant. That's all it is. So what makes up those dissolved solids? We typically think of bricks as measuring only what? Sugars. But no, it measures far more than that. Does it measure sugars? Yes, but far more than that. It measures the minerals, the amino acids, the proteins, the lipids, and the pectins in that sap. So it's a de facto, immediate point in time nutrient density measurement. So in other words, any given day, if I go out there, I can measure bricks in my pastures every single day. And I can know what to expect in terms of performance from that day's grazing with the bricks that I just put them on. And I'm going to show you data here in just a second as to how we know that. Okay? It's that powerful a tool, but this is something to be useful to you. You need to do it practically every day that you're out there moving your livestock. Okay? Then it becomes highly useful and informative, but it's simple and easy to do. It's real quick. So, I mean, I can do this in a matter of minutes and be far better informed. So we use refractometers, okay? Now, in your application, don't use the digital type. That's more for laboratory use. For field applications, use the optical type. And there's really two brands that I recommend. We've used them all, so we've spent years testing them all out. The two that are by far the best, and no, we don't get a commission for saying this at all. They don't even know who we are. But the two that are by far the best are the Atago, A-T-A-G-O, that model right there, Atago Master T, and the VG, V-E-E-G-E-E, okay? Those are the two best by far. They're the most durable, they stay calibrated, they're the most dependable. So if you're going to get a refractometer, I recommend one of those two. I've had an Atago, I've got both models and have multiple ones. I even have digital ones as well. But the one of mine, the Atago Master T, I've had for more than 15 years. I mean, I've used it over and over in the field, still works perfectly. So they last a long time. They'll cost you about $130, $140. But as long as they last, that's cheap, and especially for what it informs you of. So here's how you do it. It's real simple. Observe what your livestock are eating first. Observe what they're actually eating. What parts of the plant are they selecting and eating? And then pluck that part of the plant and measure that. That way you know the exact nutrition they're getting. Don't pluck the whole plant because they're not eating the whole plant. Why would you do that? Then you're skewing everything. You're biasing everything. Pluck what you observe them eating and measure that. What I do, and do this on sunny days, okay? Measure brick. If it's really cloudy or raining, don't do bricks. It'll always be significantly depressed. So do this on sunny days or partly cloudy days, whatever. Pluck the plant material you see them eating, take it, wad it up into a ball, and rub it vigorously between your palms until you feel moisture on your palms, okay? That way you know you've started breaking the cell walls of the plant and it's easier to extract the sap. So rub it vigorously until you feel moisture on the surface of your palms. Then, if you've got fairly green material, a regular garlic press works wonderful. for extracting it. If it's drier, we use vice presses, okay? Modified vice press with plates welded onto the tips of the vice press that I put the wad into, and then use the vice press to press out the juices, okay? So either one. But again, if it's fairly green material, active growing season, a garlic press works really well. Put that in the reservoir of the garlic press, and then use a pulsing motion. Don't use a steady squeeze. I learned this through experience. If you use a steady squeeze, you'll either break the handle or break the hinge of the garlic press. Okay? I broke a bunch of garlic presses before I figured this out. So, and I always blamed it on the garlic press, but it was me. It didn't matter what model of garlic press I bought, I broke them. So it was me. If you squeeze, let up, you don't break the presses, the handles or the hinges. And what I've actually found is that squeeze and let up pressure, actually you extract the sap a lot quicker than a constant squeeze, okay? So it extracts a lot more readily, a lot quicker. All you need is a few drops on the stage of the refractometer, okay? So you just squeeze it onto the stage of the refractometer, close your little lid, you got a thin film there, then hold it up to the sunlight. You've got an internal scale in there, and what you do is you look at the measurement on an internal scale. So you want the refractometer to go from 0 to 32% or close, 0 to 32, 33%. And there'll be a blue field and a white field. Where the blue field and the white field meet is where you take the measurement. Okay? And if you do this routinely, it's very, very telling. So why high bricks? Because research has shown that it improves our animal gains and animal performance. In dairy cows, it improves the milk production and the milk components. And in plants themselves, high bricks plants that are higher bricks are more drought resistant, they're more frost and freeze tolerant, and they're more resistant to plant disease and insects. So the health of our plant is not only an indicator of how well our animals will perform eating those high bricks plants, but it is also an indicator of the health of the plant itself. Plants that have higher bricks are far healthier and more resistant to disease and pest. And in our research, here's what we have found. We've done more than 20 years of research doing bricks. If animals are eating plants that are 5% or less bricks without any other supplement, you can expect on like stock or steer or something like that, an average daily gain no better than the low ones. They can eat all they want and they just won't gain any more than that. But if you've got a bricks in those same plants, same forages, averaging 15% or greater, those same steers will now gain in the high 2s to the low 3s every day. Whoa, just because of the difference in bricks. So running regression analysis on more than 20 years of data, here's what we found. First of all, we found that the base bricks nationwide, our mean is about 3%, so it's not very good. It's not very good. The base bricks is about 3%. So what we found was that for every 1% increase in bricks in stockers, and this is for stocker cattle, for every 1% increase in bricks, we get an additional 1/10 of a pound average daily gain. Whew. So if I go from 3% bricks to 13% bricks in the same plant, same pastures, I've got a whole nother pound a day average daily gain. Think about what that does to your bottom line. That's powerful.
What time of day do you generally pick up the bricks?
Measure bricks in the afternoon. Bricks level cycle every 24-hour photo period, okay? When the sun goes down in the evening, all of those carbohydrates and everything in the plant migrate down to the base of the plant and into the roots. is sort of their self-preservation mechanism in case the sun doesn't come up the next day, okay? Then when the sun comes back up the next morning, that photosynthetic activity gets to kicking, and all of those carbohydrates that migrated to the base of the plant now start migrating back up to the vascular system of the plant. And they don't reach peak concentration in the leaf material and all of that our animals are eating until about early to mid-afternoon. And of course, with the photosynthetic activity that's occurring at the same time, you're producing additional nutrient sugars as well, right? Okay? So it's going to be at its peak in the afternoon, so take your measurements in the afternoon. As a matter of fact, if you measure the same plant, the same day, if I go out and measure it like at 7 or 8 in the morning, I may have a Brix of 6% in that plant. But if I go out and measure that same plant, that Bahia grass or that fescue or whatever in the afternoon, now it's going to be a Brix of 11, 12, or 13%. So, knowing what we know about the gain performance, when do I want to turn them into a new paddock? Afternoon. So why would we move them in the morning to a new paddock? I just gave up free gain. Why would I do that? I can get another half a pound a day average daily gain by moving them in the afternoon to new paddocks versus the morning.
That's all grasses.
Yeah, anything growing.
So when
Anything.
you're going through and sampling very diversified for compilation, are you just taking bits and pieces across the landscape and doing a couple?
Yeah, I'm making sure I'm getting a fair represent, and again, by observing what they're eating, then I'm going and plucking that and measuring that, absolutely. And then I'm looking at what percent of my plant population is that versus that, and then, calculating an average Brix that they're consuming every day. Exactly. So here's what happens. So as your Brix percent goes up, your animal average daily gain increases pretty linearly until you get to in the low 20%. And then it starts to tail off, okay? This is in some trials at farms in 6 different states. And we split herds. These were conventional grazers originally. We split herds. They managed one half of their herd still the way they'd been managing them. The other half, they started grazing them adaptively. And this is in a single year, the difference in plant Brix between the conventionally managed and the adaptively managed. So even in the first year, we saw this significant difference in Brix. And then calculating their daily dry matter needs. They actually don't need to consume as much dry matter every day if you have higher Brix, okay? So as we increase the Brix in the plants, they can eat less and have the same level of performance or even better performance. Yes?
Alan, will the level of Brix be higher in more diverse pastures?
Mm-hmm. Why? It always, right. Brix and sustained Brix is highly dependent on soil microbial activity and the mineral cycling and water cycle in that soil. And photosynthetic capture. Okay, remember yesterday I talked about I want varied leaf architecture and plant height so that I can maximize solar capture and photosynthetic activity. The more photosynthetic activity we have, guess what? The higher the Brix is going to be in our plants because they're cycling water and mineral better. So if we want high sustained Brix, this is perennial pasture up in Manitoba, Canada, at one of our clients. In the middle of the summer, we had a workshop out there. A bunch of ranchers came in, and they looked at these pastures and said, oh my God, they're way too mature. You're going to starve your cattle to death on that. You let it get way ahead of you. We went out and measured Brix right then and there, 23%. Powerful, powerful feed source. His cattle were mud fat, so I don't know why all these other ranchers were saying you're going to starve your cattle. But at that stage of maturity, okay? So here's what we have found as well in our bricks research. All right, look at the different nutrient compositions in a plant at the different stages of growth here, okay? So at early maturity, our protein to carbs is way out of whack. We got way too much protein to energy in that plant, right? So where do we want to graze to optimize bricks and optimize animal performance? Right there. A lot later than most of us think in our plant maturity. That's what we target for finishing, grass finishing, right there. That sweet spot. When I graze there, I get the very, very best performance out of my grass fats, and I'd stack in marbling like crazy. Yes, sir.
What do you call mid-maturity?
That is,
Bloom, leaf bloom?
it's boot stage and a little beyond. So you're going to see some seed heads and all of that. Okay, so boot stage and a little beyond. Yep. So again, here we go. Yeah.
In a highly diverse.
Yes, sir. Go by the grasses.
Not everything is.
Right. Go by the grasses.
Even the grasses are not doing it.
Mm-hmm. Actually, you don't have to worry about it in a highly diverse pasture. See, that's what's so beautiful about this. If you have truly diverse pastures, you've got something at all stages and a bunch of somethings at all stages at all times, and I never have to worry about a darn thing.
So if you got one species that's gone past, you still got other species that are.
That's exactly correct. Yeah,
Mix them together, it comes out right.
that's right. That's the beauty of diversity, high levels of diversity. Yeah, it works. It works. All right, it's lunchtime, okay? So again, I think this room over here is where they told us they're gonna have lunch set up, so we'll take our lunch hour and come back and finish up this afternoon.